I would like to call the school board meeting for June 18th, 2019 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Mr. Barron.
Here.
Ms. Bradley. Here. Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn.
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here. First item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Delagardelle. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on our agenda is approval of minutes for June 4th, 2019. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Langford, second by Caldwell-Johnson.
No.
Any discussion? It was Delagardelle? Oh, okay, sorry, I heard it. Okay, we have a motion and a second, please vote. Motion passes 6-0 with one abstaining. No district recognitions, correct. Okay, the next item on the agenda is consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board in public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, do you have the motion?
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $6,231,418.87, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $566,383.35.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Barron. Any discussion? I just want to point out that our board SMART goals and our social emotional learning limitation is on this consent agenda. So once we, provided we approve this consent agenda, those will be officially adopted, which I think is a big deal. So just wanted to point that out. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on our agenda is item F1, open enrollment late applications for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the item?
Yes, per state code, there's a timeline established for folks wanting to open enroll out of their home district, and the denials that you have in item E1 are those late applications that have been denied because they do not meet special exception guidelines.
Okay, may I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late application listed for item F1?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, motion by Caldwell-Johnson, second by Barron. Are there any speakers for this item? Any discussion or any questions? Okay, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next on our agenda is item F2, open enrollment appeals for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, there are two items on this in the agenda for the open enrollment appeals for denial. These are open enrollments that where the original application was denied and it was appealed based on special circumstances, and these two did not meet that standard.
Thank you. May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment appeals listed for item F2?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, motion by Caldwell-Johnson, second by Delagardelle. Any speakers for this item? Okay, any discussion or any questions? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next on our agenda is item F3, naming request for Roosevelt High School gym floor. Superintendent Ahart, is there any additional information to share as background for this item?
No, I think it's all included in your packet.
Okay. This isn't an action item at this point, but we'll need an ad hoc committee to look into this further to make a recommendation to the board. Do we have 3 volunteers willing to serve on that? Anderson, Delagardelle, what? Name, ad hoc naming committee. And Langford. And then we'll anticipate that you'll meet soon to bring a recommendation to the board then for the July
July
meeting
9th.
if possible. Yep.
Do you want me to serve you?
Oh, that's a good point. I think that's okay. If someone can speak, yeah, as long as you do the work ahead of your, yep.
No, but Cindy said it'll be okay.
You might not, as long as we have the recommendation
Yep.
from the ad hoc committee, the rest of the board can move with that.
Cool.
Okay, thank you. Next item on our agenda is item F4, DMPS Monitoring Report, Elementary Literacy, Part 2. May I have a motion and a second to accept this report as compliant with Student Expectations Policy 4.11C?
So moved?
Okay, motion by Delagardelle and second by Anderson. We have a presentation, and I'll turn it over to Superintendent Ahart to introduce this report and our presenters.
Okay, this is the second and final early literacy. Wait a minute. Did you? Actually, for some reason, the early literacy is. Yeah, okay. That's fine. Yep, so we have our Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning, Kelly Schofield, and our Executive Director of Elementary Programs, Susie Tallman.
Okay. we're good
Ladies?
with-
Good evening. Okay, we're going to start out by just reviewing and looking at the overview of the key performance indicators and our, performance in those indicators. As you can see, just as an overview, we made some slight decreases in our K1 and 2 students in the FAST assessment, the benchmark assessment, and made a slight increase in our 3rd graders in that same assessment. And the other key performance indicators around MAP, growth, and MAP college and career ready, we showed increases in all of our grade levels in 2nd and 3rd in all of those key performance indicators. Okay, we're going to move into the FAST screening data, and as we've reported before, that this FAST screener is a large net that's cast out to really get us to recognize students that could be at risk in that, and then the assessment, the target moves as it goes through the year. So it's not that we're testing students in the fall on end of year skills. That target moves and gets more difficult as it goes forward. We're going to show some kindergarten data, and this data that we're going to present is going to be 3-year trend data. So we looked at our spring data from 2007 to 2019. You can see that we don't have a large variance of differences in gains and losses. We have some slight gains in some student groups and some slight losses in other student groups. We're projected to have 59.5% of our students meet the benchmark in 2020. Some of the trends that we did see, our Asian student group made the largest gain with the percent meeting benchmark, and our special education students and our Hispanic students showed the largest decreases over the 3 years. This particular group of kindergartners from fall to spring did show some large gains, but we didn't see those gains over the 3-year trend. Our first grade students historically have scored lower, so we did see some greater gains than we have historically seen. This is an area that typically takes a dip across the state. We were excited to see some significant gains with some of our student groups there as well. Our projection for the end of first grade is the same as kindergarten, 59.5%. Even though that is our projected goal for the benchmark in the spring of 2020, we of course want to outperform that measure. And our greatest gains, we had some significant gains with our ELL student group, our multiracial and Asian student group, while our white and African American student groups decreased somewhat over the last 3 years. Our second grade students, we did not see some of the gains we normally do in second grade. We did see some gains from winter to spring as we put some things in place, but over the 3 years, we didn't see the gains that we normally do with this group of second grade data. This is an area that we're going to dig into more to look at from fall to spring to see why we had some of the decreases that we did as well. And then we had decreases in all of our second grade student groups except for our Asian student group in second grade. Our third grade looks much like our kindergarten. There's not a lot of variance among our gains and losses. We have some data that shows some positive gains and some slight losses in the students over the 3 years. We're projected to be at 57.5% at the end of third grade in 2020, with students meeting that benchmark. We did have a couple of groups that showed some significant gains over the 3 years. That was our African American and Asian student groups. And we saw a decrease in our special education and multiracial student groups in third grade. As you know, and we've talked about before, we have used some multiple data measures to indicate and determine some schools that will receive some intensive supports from our curriculum department and our early literacy team that's made up of curriculum department and our AEA literacy specialists. And the schools that received the most intensive support, so that was some weekly support, working with the PLCs, working with the leaders in walking through and really looking at those foundational blocks of time and what was going on there. 3 out of our 6 showed some pretty good gains there, and 5 out of the 6 definitely showed gains from winter to spring as we adjusted our work with those schools, and they adjusted some things. We saw some gains from winter to spring, so we were pleased about that. Then we had 13 targeted schools, so these schools also received support from our early lit team, but not as intense and maybe not as often, not weekly. Sometimes it was every other week, but they did receive some professional development and some targeted supports, and 8 of those 13 showed gains. 2 of those 8 were significantly higher gains from fall to spring than our average in the district. So we felt like we did definitely make some headway with the supports that we had in place. We've learned some things. Also, knowing that when you provide a framework of supports to a school, it doesn't always match that school in the same way. Schools have different needs, and as we get in there and start working, we might uncover some secondary concerns or secondary issues that we need to address as well. So even though all 13 didn't make the gains we wanted, we feel like there's things in place with the other schools that will help us move forward in the next year.
Okay, then we'll take a look at map data. A little bit of a difference you'll see in the map data is that we've made some significant gains in second and third grade, which is interesting because you would expect to see that as FAST scores increase, our map would increase, and we'd want to see both of those going up in tandem, so that's a little unusual when we're looking at the data this evening. However, when looking at the 3-year trend data in regard to MAP, just a reminder, when looking at students meeting expected growth targets, that's the actual percent of students that met their individual growth target. So you can see the different student groups that all had increases from last year. When looking at the percent of expected growth met, just a reminder that that's when we're looking at, we want a student to meet 100% of their growth target, and so we're looking at the percent of students that did meet 100% or even more. And so you'll also see all the student groups and the increases over the 3 years in second grade. And really overall, whether it's looking at the meeting expected growth target data or the expected growth met, both made significant gains in all student groups for second grade. When taking a look at third grade over the past 3 years, again, you'll see increases in most all student groups when looking at meeting expected growth targets. And very similar when looking at expected growth met for third grade, that most all student groups also made some significant gains. And overall, when looking at both data points, the one student group that did not, that actually decreased is our Asian. So we're looking at a different data point here for second grade. We're looking at the percent of students at or above at risk, and this is a little bit of a new data point. We shared it with you last time in our report and again this time. And so you'll see with second grade over the 3 years that we overall had increases. Some student groups were more significant than others, and then a decrease in one of our student groups. However, when looking at our college career ready cut point, 3-year trend, it shows increases overall in all. And I think one of the things to note when looking at our college and career ready cut points is that this is a higher cut point maybe than what we've had in the past when we've had Iowa assessments, because it's more aligned with the Smarter Balance assessment. So it is more rigorous, and just something important I think to note when looking at that data. So overall, when looking at college and career readiness benchmarks, we had an increase in all student groups, but when looking at the percent of students not at risk, we had a decrease with multiracial students. And then third grade, was a little bit different. We still had areas where we had made some gains, but we've also had some areas where there were a little bit of decreases. And overall, when looking at it, you see it's not a big amount either way. A slight decrease or a slight increase depending on the student group that you're looking at. And same would hold true for college and career ready cut point as well. When looking at each student group. So for third grade, though, overall, the largest increases in the percent of students not at risk were Hispanic and Asian student groups. There was a decrease of students not at risk in third grade in our multiracial student group. And again, just when looking at the college and career readiness cut point, not significant gains or significant loss in third grade.
Okay, and as you could see, just through that data and listening, it's hard to pinpoint a trend in the data that we have, because we'll have a student group that performs well 1 year and goes down the next year, or a grade level the same. So we really are responding by continuing to look at our universal instruction that's happening in the classroom. We have partnered with different departments to work with the collaborative problem-solving process to really address those K-3 literacy goals and try to support schools in drilling down to get at the root cause and being able to address some of those. We are also practicing that same protocol at our district level. We haven't had this data as long to really dig in and to be able to pinpoint some areas to really target, but we are forming a K-3 literacy action team that will be involved in that problem-solving process as a district, and it will have representation of directors. There will be curriculum folks on there, but we also want to have a school level and community members on there to be able to address K-3 literacy more holistically as a community. And so being able to put some actions in place. So we're starting that. We're just starting to plan that and get those members on that action team. We've worked on some universal supports. We have a K-5 literacy curriculum that we'll be using next year that focuses on the shifts in the core. It will really help the teachers build vocabulary, build background knowledge, and it focuses on grade level reading text and the scaffolds that we need to do that. It also has a K2 foundational skills block that's has a comprehensive phonics component. Also is that curriculum, learning curriculum, is a green light curriculum in all of the reports that vet curriculums. So, and it's culturally responsive as well. So we're excited about that. We're working to implement that and also support the implementation of it in a large way so that we can ensure that teachers are successful with that. And then we're putting together intensive and targeted supports for early literacy again, looking at multiple data points, trying to target those schools that really still may be struggling and be able to help them look at their data through that problem-solving process and pinpoint some areas to work on, and areas for support that we can support.
Questions?
Any questions, board?
I do.
Ms. Anderson?
Yeah. Let's see, I like the holistic approach that you're going to take moving forward. And you mentioned community members. Who would those be and how would they be chosen? Where, and when?
Yeah, we just are starting that and to meet together to determine who those would be, but definitely open to suggestions for that. We want to think about also how we can get input from the community, but also how the community can support that literacy, K-3 literacy overall.
Would we get like an update about that somehow? Like that process, what that looks like and
The task force process, is that what you're asking?
yeah.
Sure, yes, absolutely.
Ms. Delagardelle?
I have two things when you said suggestions. It kind of made me think as you were talking about this, that our school districts are naturally warded through the school board process, and that having representatives, I think, from every area of the city will be very important, just because we do know that trends in the data of our students tend to change based generally in those, even though we don't drill quite down to that level, but to make sure that we have parents and community members involved from all areas of the city. And also, I'm really excited to see that you're looking already to address the new board goals, because that was kind of what I wanted to raise up. As I was looking at these goals, as I was looking at this report, it's very clear where the board was and where we're going, and that we're constantly just measuring against ourselves in the past. And even when we say we're making large gains, sometimes it's less than 3% for our kids, and that's not, over the last 3 years, hasn't really gotten us anywhere. So I'm hoping by having a very specific goal, it's going to provide the guidance that you need to get big results for our students in our community, because we need it. I don't want to be sitting in 3 years and still be looking at stagnant data. So I'm hoping that this is going to give everybody the clarity, and we've given you the focus to kind of run with kind of what we want on behalf of the kids in Des Moines. So
Absolutely, all the things that we've been planning from really before we got the data would be to address what we knew were coming as board goals.
Anybody else?
Is this a partially or?
It's designated as compliant.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So I do have a few comments. So I agree that our ability to gain clarity at the board level will obviously help the staff. And I feel like looking at all of these data points, we're just all over the place. We're just all over the place, and it's hard to really synthesize what the implications of all of the data points across MAP and FAST and career and college readiness really means when you look at all of the subgroups and the subpopulations, because it's just all over the place. So I'm challenged in a couple of ways, because especially for our African American students, and this likely is going to come up a little later as well, with our males of color monitoring report. But, there are places where we have significant decreases, places where we have some rather stark gains, but it's hard to sort of draw the contrast and comparison about what that really means, for our students, no matter which subgroup it is. So I'm going to vote to support this tonight, but recognize that we have a lot of work to do, and our ability to gain the clarity around what we're measuring and the measurements that we're using against a goal will hopefully allow us to see the gains that we absolutely need to see, because I'm frustrated by this, absolutely frustrated. And I'm part of the frustration, so I'm going to own my part of it, but we've got to do better.
And I think that just shows how much work we've done with staff this year to get a lot, and with community input, to get a lot of clarity around where we are and what we're gonna need. And I think that will mean that you guys will be giving us fewer data points, which I think will give us more clarity on exactly where we are. Because for a long time when I reflected on this, I thought as a new board member, I just wasn't understanding how to read monitoring reports. And the longer we've been talking about our goals, the more I realize it just is we don't have a lot of clarity around the goal, which leaves you guys just throwing a bunch of data at us and hoping that something, you know, is showing a trend towards positive for our kids. So hopefully this will make it more clear for everybody.
Ms. Langford?
A couple of comments. Thank you for your time and attention to this report. I'm also frustrated, and I think a lot of my frustration comes from just the duration that you know, I've been on the board and where our data lies, but I also know that I'm not frustrated alone. I know that you all who are working on these reports are also just as frustrated to see where we are with this data. But the question for me, that I think the first point about the data and it being all over the place, I think how our data is presented is conflicting at times, right? So you'll show like we have a gain from 1 year to 1 year, right? Or we might be looking at from fall to spring, right? But then when we look at that data point and we look at where we were at spring of last year and spring of this year, it tells a different story, right? I was looking at the monitoring report as we were going through the presentation. And so while we had some gains from a fall to spring data point, when we looked at where we were last spring and where we were this spring, it tells a different story, and we had decreased, right? And so I think the point is data can be used to tell a lot of different stories. And I want to make sure that we're getting the truest story of what we need, what's the information that we're looking for, and then what's the real story about how our kids are being affected and what their outcomes are. And I think the monitoring report, we tell different stories sometimes, and I don't think that necessarily is something that you notice right when we tell the story that way. And so I think that's important to think about what data are we using to tell our story and what's most important, because there were some differences there that I'm like, yeah, we grew this year, but if we look back at last year, we're not necessarily growing from year to year. And I think it was I should have taken a note of that, and I can get my note afterwards to where it was. I think we were looking at map data. I can't remember for what grade level. I'll save most of my comments, though, for our next report, but yeah.
Any other comments? I just do want to, I mentioned earlier during the consent agenda that on that consent agenda were our board goals, and I just want to read what the literacy goal is, just for the benefit of everyone here, so that they understand where we're going with this and the clarity that hopefully we've provided, and that the superintendent will be able to provide us with those lead goal progress measures that we will be able to understand quite clearly what the story is and where we're going. And that is that the percent of all third grade students on track in reading will increase from 52% to 72% by June 2023 as measured by FAST. And that's the board's goal. And then we'll have the goal progress measures from staff that we'll be looking at with some frequency over the course of the next year. So just so everyone out there understands as well. Anybody else have anything? Okay, we do have a motion by Della Gardell and a second by Anderson. If there are no other comments, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is, item F5, monitoring report, males of color, part 2. May I have a motion and a second to accept this report as partially compliant with Student Expectation Policy 4.11B?
Move approval.
We have a presentation, and I will turn it over to Dr. Ahart to introduce the report and our presenters.
Okay, it's the big night. We have 4 part 2s tonight. This one is the Males of Color report, and our District Director of Activities, Jason Allen, our Associate Superintendent, Matt Smith, and our AEA Equity Consultant, Jilmara Nova-Mitchell.
Good evening. Just a clarifying question. I'm assuming somebody else is hitting the button because is there a? There it is. Thank you. I didn't know that gigantic thing was a mouse. Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Well, good evening. So tonight, we're going to present to you the monitoring report and the data regarding the Males of Color Part 2. As Tom mentioned, colleagues Jason Allen and Jilmara Mitchell are here to help present the report. So thinking that we were going to be actually the last monitoring report, the way this was built was that knowing that you're going to see some replicate data in the other monitoring reports, we didn't want to repeat that for 4 monitoring reports. So what we offered, obviously, is the monitoring report itself, which has been edited to be designated as partially compliant and not compliant. That was an email that I sent out probably 2 hours ago. So what you're going to see in this monitoring report is some data regarding some systemic efforts to impact the achievement of our males of color. Notably the Schools for Rigor implementation, which we are now in concluding our 3rd year of this, but also the significant investment in activities to engage our students, our males of color, particularly in school. So I'm going to turn it over to Jilmara.
And we will give you a second to take a look at our equity vision for the district. We feel it's always important to keep that in mind when we talk about males of color and our efforts for equity. The next slide would like to remind you of the 3 equity buckets. Everything we do for equity should fall in 1 or more buckets: learning, thriving, and belonging. Learning is really about the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Thriving is the relationships that we want the kids to experience as they go through their education. And belonging is the partnership we have with students, families, and communities to create the support we want to provide for the students' learning experiences.
So for the next series of slides, this is going to focus on the Schools for Rigor implementation. And so the purpose of this slide is to represent the progress of all students and our males of color designated out by African American and Hispanic males, and to compare that to our schools that are actually not in the treatment yet. So just a reminder that we onboarded 6 schools in FY17, and then we onboarded another 16 schools in FY18, and in our current fiscal year of FY19, we onboarded 6 more schools. So we have a total of 28 schools receiving the Schools for Rigor instructional treatment and processes and structures that go along with that. We still have 32 schools that actually have not onboarded yet. So this slide is meant to represent to show the sort of bang for the buck, if you will, and the difference between schools that are receiving Schools for Rigor treatment and those that are not. The other additional data points that we glean from this is, as Terry mentioned earlier, it's sort of all over the map. While there are some green arrows when you compare, for example, in our demonstration schools, African-American males at 43.52% in comparison as you move down the chart to our African-American males in our non-schools for rigor treatment at 30.70%. That's the reason for the green arrow. The problem that exists is that there's still a major disparity between our all students and our African-American males in that same column in the demonstration schools. You'll see that same disparity in the FY18 cohort 2, as well as an even more significant disparity in this year's onboarding schools. And so just a reminder that this is actually the elementary. This is percent of 2nd grade through 5th grade students at or above progressing at college and career readiness benchmark. There are some notable achievements there in terms of, if you look at our Hispanic males, for example, in the demonstration schools, there's actually a positive trend there. There's not a disparity in achievement between our Hispanic males and our all students. The same exists in cohort 2 for our Hispanic males, and the same exists for cohort 3 for our Hispanic males. This does not ring true for our African American males. The disparity is still there. It's a smaller disparity in our schools that are receiving treatment in grades 2nd through 5th grade as compared to our non-schools for rigor treatment, but the disparity is still there. And so it's disappointing, but the gap is closing a bit in those schools, far more significantly than is in our non-schools for rigor treatment right now. This is the same data set, except for this is 6th through 8th grade. Not nearly the progress in 6th through 8th grade as we're seeing in our elementary schools and our schools for rigor treatment. As you can see, there's a lot of red arrows there. So these red arrows, again, represent these schools are not outperforming the non-schools for rigor treatments. That's the reason for the red arrows. You will notice in our demonstration schools, there is a green arrow for African American males as well as Hispanic males. The demo schools have been in the treatment for 3 years now, as opposed to the other schools. The other data point to also consider, I'd be remiss if I did not let this up, in our secondary schools, we have far fewer schools in comparison. So what you're looking at right now in terms of demo cohort 2 and cohort 3 are 5 middle schools compared to 5 non-school for rigor middle schools. When you consider elementary schools, we've got 22 elementary schools involved in the treatment plan. Yes, ma'am. So obviously the smaller the sample size, the greater the fluctuation, both positive and negative, that we're going to see in secondary schools. Oop, wrong button. Again, same data set for MAP math, percent of 9th grade, 10th grade students at or above progressing college and career readiness benchmark. The NA for cohort 3 is we did not onboard a high school this fiscal year. How many high schools? Right now, there's only 2. Yes, ma'am. So we have 1 in demo and 1 in cohort 2. Again, the fluctuation, good and bad, just because of the small sample size. It is important, I think, to note in our demonstration school for high school, the disparity for African American males in relationship to all students in our demonstration schools is a negative 11.63% disparity. It's not where we want it. It's not even remotely close to being where we need that to be, those data sets. Not only the disparity, but even just the percent of students achieving at or above progressing in college and career ready is still not even close where we need that to be. The standard, we're still not meeting the standard system-wide. We're showing some gains in some areas, but we're just not meeting the standard yet. That same comparison, when you look at the non-school for rigor, when comparing African American males and all students, conversely, from demo schools, that's a negative 19.81% disparity, percentage point disparity. Again, they both have disparities. It's a much smaller disparity in the demonstration school than it is that in a school that has not received treatment yet. So this is similar data now looking at reading. This is again for 2nd through 5th grade students at or above progressing in college and career readiness benchmark. Some areas, most areas, the schools for rigor treatment schools are outperforming that of non-schools for rigor, but not in every area. Again, if we look at cohort 3, we have a significant disparity that exists at 33.38% between African American males and all students, as opposed to a 22.92% disparity in our non-schools for rigor between African American male and all students. Again, neither of them are acceptable, and it's disappointing, and we have a long way to go and a lot of work ahead of us. Same map, reading data. This time it's also for 6th through 8th grades. We have a smaller gap in achievement for our demonstration schools as compared to our non-schools for rigor and our cohort 2 and cohort 3. Same sentiment, though. We still have disparities. We have not completely closed any gaps there, and nor is the standard near where it needs to be for student achievement overall. And the last school for rigor data set is for 9th and 10th graders, map reading also. Again, demo school for high school is 1 school, cohort 2 is 1 school, non-schools for rigor are 3 high schools. This data set is supposed to represent, for African-American males, the closing of some gaps, but again, still really, really far away from the goal and from the standard that we have set in closing gaps. But if you look at it's the representation of the percent of students who meet or exceed on track for college and career readiness cut point in the spring. So for grades, this is collapsed data. From grades 2 through 5 in 17-18 school year, it was 18.9% achievement gap for African-American males in math. In FY19, this school year, while the gap has been reduced, it's still at 11.7%.
Before you move off the slide, can you, are these all students or are these just schools for rigor demonstration schools?
These are all students.
Got it, thank you.
Yes. Same data set, but this one is specifically for Hispanic males. And Rob, I want to make a clarifying statement real quick. I want to make sure that I answer your question. It's all students, but for the schools for rigor.
That was actually my question.
Okay, thank you.
So this is just data on students at schools for rigor demonstration
Correct.
schools.
Yes, sir. It's
Thank
all
you.
student data. Yes, sir. Yeah. And then it's broken out by Hispanic. First slide was African American males. This slide is around Hispanic males. What you will notice is that right now the schools for rigor treatment, predominantly at elementary school, but also it rings true in many cases at the secondary school, has been more successful for our Hispanic males than it is for our African American males. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, just before we go on, I just want to, how many students, and I'm sure you can't tell me exactly, but when we're talking about decreasing gaps and we're talking about 1/3 of a percentage point, how many kids is that really?
I've got the N number
Yeah.
in the monitoring report that I can find.
Yeah, but I guess my point is though, it's not a significant number, right?
Correct. We're talking
So
about.
so if we're portraying the data as we're closing a gap, we're really staying stagnant if it's not a statistically significant number of kids, right?
Yes, I would. Yes.
I guess that would just be my challenge in the way that we're portraying the data for our community of
Hear you.
if it's 1/3 of a percentage point, it might be 15 kids. And while 15 kids is great, 15 kids is not statistically significant when we're talking about thousands of kids.
Correct.
Okay.
Now we're going to take a look at the thriving data. And percentage of students having 0 to 1 office referrals. We, K5, African American males had an increase, which is a positive increase, and Hispanic students had a decrease. And then 6-8, African American males had an increase, which was a positive increase, and Hispanics also had an increase. 9-12, African American males had an increase, and so did Hispanic students. Out of school suspension days, disproportionality trend, African American males had a decrease, which is a positive decrease. And then Hispanic also had a decrease in K5. 6-8, African American students male students had an increase, which is a negative increase for us. And Hispanic students had also a negative increase. And 9-12, African American males had a negative increase, and Hispanic students had a positive decrease. Expulsion, as you can see, it has remained at 0. for all student groups. Then belonging data, percentage of students chronically absent has had a negative increase for all groups for us this year. And the arrows actually are a 3-year trend. And we have been calculating that a bit differently in a way that it's more accurate, but that does make the numbers worse for us. And so I want for you to remember that, because I know you're aware of that, but the way we calculate chronic absenteeism has changed. It's minutes, you know, it's not whole day and half a day. And so that makes us look worse in that category there, but it's still our most alarming data point because there is no positive decrease there for anybody.
Yeah, I think the other important aspect of attendance is that we've moved from average daily attendance to the actual measure of minutes missing. But additionally, we have really upgraded the quality of the data so that we actually have systems in place now to make sure that buildings are alerted when teachers have not taken attendance. The default is, if a student is not marked on attendance, the default is that they're in attendance. And so if classrooms had not been attendance hadn't been recorded, that it defaulted to the positive, and we've been trying to make sure that we're accurately accounting for that. And so teachers are being alerted when they've not taken attendance so that we have more accurate data. And unfortunately, that has meant that the absenteeism rate, as reported, has gone up.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, this is an area that we are paying close attention to since last year, because we are aware of the fact that we have to improve this quite rapidly. So annual dropout rate trend, we have seen a positive decrease for African American males and also Hispanic. And this is 17-18, comparing 17-18. Yes. Because there were like 6 or 7, it was all over the place, so we couldn't really find a good way to summarize that for you, so we stuck to comparing 17 to 18. And then 4-year cohort graduation rate trend, as you know, we are 1 year and 2 years behind in collecting this data as always, because, you know, it just takes a while for us to receive that data. And so 9-12, the 4-year cohort graduation rate is 74% for African American males and 72.51% for Hispanic males. If you look across this, you can see the gaps between all students. If you look across on the yellow row, 80%, 74% to 72%, that's the gap in graduation rates that we have. And then if you look at 5-year cohort graduation rate gaps, we go from 85% to 81% to 80% for Hispanic students.
So again, this presentation doesn't lift up all the KPIs in the monitoring report, as you know. So what the response to this data is not just in response to just the presentation data, it's in response to the entire monitoring report. So these are some higher level responses to data. I can talk a little bit about why I'm using the phrase intentionally around higher level here in just a second, but it will be to continue to invest in student activities. In just a second, Jason's going to share a few slides regarding the student activity data that has been an intentional and purposeful investment, specifically in secondary, but all K-12 schools. We're also going to continue in the investment in our people and the capacity building at both district and school administrators and teachers and staff. That includes working with our national partners. We began a partnership at the beginning of this school year with the New York City Leadership Academy, and we're continuing that partnership as well as our partnership with Learning Sciences International that supports our Schools for Rigor work. We also have the continued development around utilizing the IDI, and we're going to expand that to our new associate principals for the upcoming school year. Up to this point, Jamar, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had 125 administrators take the IDI and receive coaching and continue to grow in their own cultural proficiency.
We actually have had 250 staff members, 125 administrators, so.
Again, also wanted to point out the school leadership redesign. As you know, this school year, we asked that all school-level administrators, school improvement leaders, deans, and then vice principals reapply for a newly created job of an associate principal of instruction, and that process was geared towards raising the standard for that position, but also it was screened through a culturally responsive writing task that all applicants, all 232 applicants, were screened through before they moved on to the next round. So that's some intentional efforts that we'll continue to invest in, and specifically with not only New York City Leadership Academy in terms of support of these newly hired associate principals, but also with Franklin Covey, another national partner that we have. Again, also continuing to work on the adoption and development of culturally responsive and relevant curriculum for our students. And of course, certainly not last and probably most significant of each of these investments is a continuous effort and maybe a more systemic effort in raising voice in specifically the problem-solving process. And so I'm going to come back and cycle back to my original statement of these are high-level responses to the data right now because the data haven't been June 18th today, the data coming in at the early part of June. We have not been able to get into a deep problem-solving formal process looking for root causes of where we continue to go wrong or even sometimes where we might be going right and we don't know why yet. And so continuing to dig into that, but that's where that student, staff, community, and the comprehensive stakeholder voice really comes into play around that. And so we have an opportunity to engage a number of stakeholders in the problem-solving process on the front end, as opposed to sometimes, which is what we may have done in the past, which is engage them after we've gone through the process and then look for support to implement strategies based on what we discovered as root cause. Going to do a better job of getting folks around the table on the front end with that. Student activity data. So this is a response also to the data as a continuing investment in student activities. Jason?
So again, this is a reflection of the investment that's been made over the course of probably not just a year, but several, at least 3 to 4 years. And a focus for us on not just participation, but on how we impact the overall data sets, specifically looking at chronic absenteeism, the referrals, as well as our high school GPA. With our chronic absenteeism, I think you'll notice that students who are involved versus not involved across the board, we've seen what I would consider a significant growth, although particularly with both our African American males and Hispanic males, not exactly where we want to be specifically for African American males, but that's a 22% difference in those who are involved versus not involved. It's a little bit higher when you look at the high school, which we know that that's an area of focus. When you look at our level 2 referrals, again, I think across all of these data sets, we show demonstrated improvement, more significant African American males in the middle schools as well as in the high schools, and then finally with looking at the GPA set, I think as you can see, specifically looking at those Hispanic males, those who are involved, that's a 2.71 versus not involved, a 2.13. And so I think we've, with our focus on the data and I think being pretty intentional about how that impacts, our students, we continue to see what I consider to be, good progress.
For capacity building, we have,
Oh, hold on, sorry. Would you guys, since we did talk about the building leadership redesign, just touch on the reboot of the AD position?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a question?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we put that in context.
Yeah, absolutely. We've in the past, prior to this year, actually, including this year, our director of activities positions now is the director of activity and school equity, where we are placing an intentional focus on how we are improving the outcomes, not just on every kid as a whole, but on each individual kid, and looking at where our disparities might be, particularly looking at not just athletics, but activities in some of our club programs, how those funds are being allocated, and where is it that our kids are actually wanting to participate. In the middle schools, we've added for next year student engagement coordinators to do very much of the same thing. To put this, part of what we've done over the last year is that we surveyed roughly about 1,200 kids in our middle schools to figure out what it is what their interest might be. This year, we've surveyed 2,800 kids, and so for the purpose of again trying to identify, where it is that we need to be focusing our attention specifically that impacts, participation, GPA, absenteeism. How do we keep them at schools? And so we're excited about what that potentially will look like for us. Particularly once we get about a year underneath our belt and we can measure it against our current data.
And as Jason finished sharing, I want to say that we really struggle to decide which data point to share with you because Flex Academy has some amazing data that we want to share, but our time is very limited and we had a lot of data points that gear up and we had a lot of things that we want to share, but we didn't have enough time. So this is just an example, but we have many that we could bring up at another time. So for capacity building, we have, as Matt mentioned, partnered with the New York Leadership Academy, Learning Science International, and frankly, COVI. And the three main areas that we are targeting with these three external partners are equity, culturally responsive leadership, and instructional practices. The New York Leadership Academy is a key partner for us in that area. Student-centered teaming for LSI, and adult social-emotional learning for COVI. We have really devoted a lot of time into the cultural proficiency side of the work through the IDI. Every one of the principals in the district has taken this assessment this year and has had a 2-hour debrief with me to understand their position in the continuum and to understand a goal that they could be working towards so that they could carry on the equity work. That is a lot of time investment, as you know, it's a time-consuming assessment. However, I believe that that's a key portion of our work in developing our leaders to be able to implement the equity goals we have. And as a system, there's 5 stages in this continuum that measures how you can connect across difference. And the first 3 stages, denial, polarization, and minimization, if you fall into one of these, you're not able to connect with somebody who is extremely different from you, not only racially, but in every sense of the way. And we want to make sure at the MPS that leaders fall into acceptance or adaptation, because that's when we're going to start seeing large shifts in our system data, because we cannot carry on the equity work until we are there. And so I have invested a lot of my time this year in trying to work with leaders in moving across the continuum. And as you see the results, for 125 leaders, as I said, we have had some leadership team members that have started taking this. So altogether, we have 250 the MPS staff members who have been assessed. But this particular data point is just for leaders. So it involves all central office leaders, all principals, and the AA team that works for Des Moines. And it's 138 people involved in here. And this assessment captures where we think we are, the PO, and where we are really functioning at. And as you can see, we position ourselves at 127 in the scale, which is the 4th stage. It's the first effective stage in dealing with differences. And we are, as a team, at the 2nd bar there at 109, ending the 3rd stage, which is minimization, and at the cusp of the first effective stage. We are very close. We are like at 109, at 115, you become effective connecting across difference. And that's our goal with this work, so that we can see more implementation of equity goals across the district.
And so just to reiterate, the opportunity that exists is to invite voice into the conversation during the problem-solving process prior to coming up with strategies and research and things like that, which is sometimes been our sort of framework or our context. And so we have a different opportunity that lies before us, knowing that none of us in this room right now are satisfied or even remotely happy with where the data lies. There is some progress, but it's not even remotely close to where we need to be, and we can do better.
Thank you. Board, questions, comments?
Oops. I have some, but
Ms. Anderson.
I don't have to go first, so.
Well, no one else has raised their hand, so go ahead.
Okay, let's see. The activities, just tell me, I know you might have said, is it sports, and can you name just like what falls under activities? I
Right,
guess,
that would be
when you say that.
any of our athletics. That would also be any of our co-curricular programs, band, orchestra.
Okay.
It would also include any clubs, debate, journalism. Any of those would be included in those numbers.
All right, and I know, like, we're seeking more support from the community, and I think this would be a great, I know just from my own experience that some of the kids would be even more active if they had rides, if they had shoes. Like, I mean, I feel like we could do a better job of partnering just with our neighborhoods and community. I don't know. I'm sure you do that. I think.
I would agree with you that it's always about the community involvement and engagement, and certainly with the number of kids right now, we serve well over 10,000 students in activities, almost a third of the district. And we can't do it alone. And
Right.
while I'm incredibly appreciative of the work that you've done to help to support those efforts, we are indebted to our community, and we need their support in order to continue to find innovative ways to reach these students.
And then it was mentioned the student engagement coordinators. How many, or is it just one, or?
Yeah, it'll be a .5 position. We'll have actually 10 of them in our middle schools. And so.
Half-time.
Yeah, well, they're kind of, yeah.
And what are they doing the other half? Some of them, like,
Depends on the school.
Yeah, it depends on the
Yeah.
building.
A lot of them are interventionists.
Yes.
okay.
And so they have the framework of their day is built around mentoring students, supporting student needs, in addition to serving as a student engagement coordinator.
Okay, and then, all right, maybe, yeah, I don't know quite what their job tasks would be. Maybe it's so new that you're figuring that out, or, right?
Yeah, we're anticipating that. In addition to the regular activities, of course, it's all intertwined. It's looking at how we can better focus on not just participation, but engagement, meaning that not looking at their involvement in just one activity, but how do we get them involved in multiple activities? How do we involve the community in that? How do we continue to look at the data and work in collaboration in the schools to improve their attendance? I mean, what more can we be doing? What other conversations do we need to have? I think Matt mentioned, how do we get more voice? And so that's what we would anticipate that they would be, a part of what they'd be doing in year one.
And then the schools of rigor, I mean, do you think that some things don't work at some schools? Like, is it like if you kept trying the schools of rigor at a certain school and it just wasn't, you weren't getting the results? I mean, when do you, like, I don't know.
So the Schools for Rigor practices and teacher move techniques are research-based. So they're the implementation of that, there's various successes in schools for various reasons. Sometimes that's dependent upon the conditions for learning that exist in the school. Sometimes it depends upon the culture of the building, and that being able to go through which is literally some second order change in how we instruct and how we organize students for learning. And I think we may have had this conversation just a little bit at this board table, but it's been a long while. Around the nuance right now is around student teaming, right? About creating specific and purposeful and intentional student teaming around a task that is complex enough and aligned to the standard that requires student teaming, but it's not a group. We just don't just group kids haphazardly. We team them for the purpose of solving a complex task so that they're interdependent upon one another's thinking and their perspectives and their unique experiences that they bring to the table. That just doesn't happen. That's quite, as you know, quite a skill set to develop, and it takes practice, and it takes coaching, and it takes support, which is really where the Schools for Rigor process is heavy on coaching and support and the monitoring of implementation. But what we are seeing, which is also sort of I would call it a national trend amongst Schools for Rigor schools across the country that are involved in this process, is the results are far more accelerated at the elementary level than they are at the secondary level. There's fewer schools at the secondary level that have the rates of success in this model than there are at elementary schools, and that's certainly playing itself out right now in Des Moines Public Schools. So part of that problem-solving process is to get teachers in the room, to get administrators, associates, and building staff members, along with district staff members in the room, and community members and parents and students around why it might be working more successfully in a particular elementary school versus this one, or why it might not be working in a secondary school as opposed to an elementary school, and really digging into some of that information and that data that's available to us. And really relying on perspectives and thinking. That's a really long-winded answer to your question, so I apologize. But there's a number of variables that are going to be contributing to that, and sometimes the variables are different depending on the school.
Right.
I'm sorry, just add one more thing. Just another variable that I can tell you that we've had lots of conversations around is the administration staff. Sometimes we have a brand new principal and a brand new associate principal, and they're new to the work, they're new to the leadership and serving in that capacity. And so to create an environment where we're looking for paradigm shifts and adaptive change around pedagogy and around what we believe around students' capabilities and being able to achieve a highly complex task. We can talk about it, but having your behaviors be aligned with that are two different things, and that takes a significant amount of investment in conversations and work and support around what we believe around children. That's PD, and that's training, and that's, again, really intentional shifts and attempts to think about not just technical teacher moves in the classroom or administrative moves in the building. It's really around why we do what we do, and becoming reoriented to a different and a higher purpose for our work, both in the classroom and in the administrative offices and in the hallways.
Something that we're trying to do, and Matt, you can speak more to that than I can, is to align our external partners' focus around equity, so that when LSI comes to do their work, we know that it has a good impact on students of color in a lot of these schools, but they don't intentionally call it the same things we are calling and do equity work. And so we're trying to bring that together for people at the building level so that they're not confused. And I see a lot of opportunity in aligning LSI's work with student voice, elevating student voice, because that's what they do, but they don't call it student voice. And so Matt has been working on bringing them all together to explain equity is a main goal for us. How can we align language so that if we are a principal or a assistant principal from a building receiving all this PD makes sense and comes together?
Ms. Langford.
All right, thank you all for the time and effort that it took to put together this report. I've had conversations with all of our leadership at this point, but I just had a couple, 2 questions and then some thoughts. And the first question is for you, Superintendent, and I'm just interested, just personally, when you receive this report, what's your initial response, right? Or I'm sure you've had a lot of time to think about it. What's your response to this report in terms of how our Black students are doing, our Black males?
Frustration is my response. I mean, that's my overwhelming response. It's been a focus. I think we're going to have a tighter focus with the new SMART goals, but to a point that Terry made earlier about, and we'll see it in the algebra report to a lesser extent, and also in the early childhood report. There's a lot of different data points that collectively tell the story, but it's really difficult to parse out what's working and what's not. We're trying to give a robust picture. I think having a narrower focus on, we've drawn a line in the sand now with the SMART goals saying this is the measure that matters, and so we'll inform the board on other indicators that we think are indicative of progress, but the buck stops at the end of the year with this measure, and that's one of the things that's frustrating. We feel like in large part, we know what has to happen, but it's a multi-pronged approach. It's working with cultural proficiency and adaptiveness with all of our staff that work with our kids, which is a massive undertaking. It's working with ensuring that we have the right materials in front of our students. It's trying to improve attendance, through engagement and other efforts. So, we have some indicators that show that some of the things that we know will lead to success are in place, but we're still not getting the results that we want. And even where we're showing growth, quite frankly, it's not growing as rapidly as we would like to see it. On the other hand, when we're looking for places that we feel like are really knocking it out of the park, it's difficult to find examples that we can learn from that have sustained closing the gap and maintained that. So we don't feel like there's an off-the-shelf solution to this, and we're taking the approach that the whole system has to change its paradigm, as Matt referenced earlier. And I do think, and this is my honest belief, that there aren't enough of us that genuinely believe that all of our students can achieve at the levels that we're talking about around this table. And we're working on that. And the IDI, there's a conversation I had with a staff member who's leaving us to take a position out of state. We were talking about how do we accelerate this work. And she said, we need to give the IDI to everybody. I agree, but what's difficult to do is, and Jomara can talk more deeply about this, is providing that tool and then actually supporting the folks who take it, recognizing where they are in the continuum, and actually having in place real supports that will help them move across the continuum. So we're dramatically expanding the number of folks that are going to have exposure and support in moving on the continuum, and we want to continue to grow that number. But ideally, we could have everybody jump in on that right now if we had an avenue to provide trained support, so that we were actually supporting them in their effort and not just frustrating them by them having a perceived number and then seeing what their actual is, and that causing frustration without being able to coach them up to a level where we know they're hitting the mark where they actually can effectively connect across difference. That was a very long-winded answer, but it's an intracted challenge that there's a lot of people around the country working on, and we're certainly making our contributions, but we are not satisfied. I'm not personally satisfied with where we are.
Okay.
And it's frustrating.
Yeah, no, thank you. I know that that's true. I have a follow-up question that I'll ask you offline, just kind of about
Sure.
what you said, but for the sake of time,
Yeah.
I'll keep moving.
Okay.
The second question I had is for you, Matt and Jomara, and maybe Jason. We know that we've seen some gains in our schools for rigor on the elementary level, particularly with our Black male students, and I'm wondering what you think is, I know we haven't done much problem solving yet, but from the work that you've been doing this year, is there anything that we can attribute some of that success to?
Yes, but I'm a little reluctant to say, based on the comment that you and I both lifted up around. It's important to dig into the data much more deeply. That includes perspectives and voices around the folks that are doing this work day in, day out.
Yep.
But what I would offer is that the Schools for Rigor process creates a sense of urgency around structure and process for monitoring implementation of training. That includes what is known as coaching for implementation, or C4Is as they're known in buildings. And so the shift to a 45-day cycle that aligns with the Iowa Professional Development Learning Cycle includes a training with specific targets for teacher moves in the training, and then that's followed up by very intentional and specific coaching the next days for coaching for implementation. Because what we know about research in terms of training in PD is that less than 10% of training in PD gets implemented across the country. That's a national statistic. And so the opportunity that exists in the Schools for Rigor are some processes and structures that actually combat that and improve the implementation rates on research-based practices. And so I think that in and of itself drives a sense of urgency around this not just being a training that we can pick and choose and sort of adapt and apply bits and elements of it here and there where we think might be appropriate. There's some structure to it. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to get it right immediately. What it does mean is that we offer some attempts and some intentional, purposeful attempts around some research-based practices of teacher moves that are shown and proven to improve academic gains for all students, but also for students of color. And so what we don't want to do is leave those opportunities on the table when we spend, and we've invested a lot of dollars and time and resources into some training and supports around some very specific research-based strategies.
And if I may add, I think that one of the, and again, I'll agree with Matt that until we analyze this more in depth, I don't want to jump to conclusions. However, I do think that logically we know that at the elementary level, as a teacher, I'm working with a group of students in my classroom throughout the day. They leave for some enrichment and arts and physical education and so forth. But for the most part, I have the same group of students. So I have an opportunity to know those students better. And one of the key strategies, as Matt talked about earlier, is strategically creating collaborative teams with these students very purposefully. And an elementary teacher is better positioned to do that effectively when they just organically have a richer knowledge of each student in their classroom because they have them for the majority of the day. It also, that same dynamic helps inform part of the reason why we're changing that high school schedule, where we have more frequent touches by teachers to the same group of students and a longer block of time more consistently that will better position them to make the best use of that time, especially when we talk about that schools for rigor approach, where they can more strategically leverage the relationship among the students to build those collaborative teams.
I would offer, just in addition to that, one of the things that we tried a couple of different implementations with schools, meaning that when we started off with the demonstration schools, there were conditions that needed to be in place in terms of looking at staff Gallup results, for example, around the depth and breadth of trust in the culture of academic learning that currently existed on the campus, so that when you implement the Schools for Rigor processes and the teacher moves, that the conditions, if you will, the soil is sort of tilled for that implementation, and those second-order instructional shifts that need to be made are made with more ease and much more fluidity within the staff because there's a high degree of trust. So we've seen some success in that. We've also looked at this similar implementation model for what we would phrase as transformation schools that where the conditions may not have been to the degree of trust with staff to staff administration, students to staff that exists as evident by, for example, the Gallup data. And we haven't had the success in those schools. LSI, as our consultant in this, would say it's not meant for that. We've got to get conditions in place first for that, and that has played itself out to some degree or another in our implementation. So there's some areas where we think that again at a higher level we know where we can improve, and we can offer some supports and some opportunities to move the work forward at an accelerated rate in some of these transformation schools. But that's also something that will need to be discussed in the problem-solving process as we're lifting up why we might be successful in schools versus others.
Mm-hmm. If I can interject real quick, just because it's relevant to something you just said around the conditions and trust and all of those things that maybe aren't present. Is that where the adult SEL intersects?
It is.
This work then?
It is.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. So when we talk about Franklin Covey's work around beginning with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and then also the Speed of Trust, there's some intentional work being done to create a culture of care, if you will, for all staff, specifically our school level, of course our district office level too, but specifically our school level, so that we create a culture where we are in absolute support of one another and we are creating environments where trust is actually driving the work, as opposed to the lack of trust being the barrier or the inhibitor to folks taking academic and instructional or administrative risks around improving outcomes and opportunities for students, specifically students of color. Right now, the overwhelming, if you look at just Gallup data in and of itself, is that we haven't built that culture of trust yet. And so this adult SEL is a place that we really have to begin. Doesn't mean that we're not doing things in terms of social emotional learning for students, but what we can't do is not pay purposeful and intentional attention to the adults working in our schools and with our schools and our community, and because they are the solution and in all of this for our students. And so we got to do a better job of giving some individual attention to those adults in our buildings.
And that, Cindy, also connects with cultural proficiency.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask
So
next.
it's all together.
So then the SEL that intersects with cultural proficiency, and what about trauma-informed practice?
As well, because if you think about the three circles analogy that I've shared with you a while ago, in the middle it's the self-work and it's social emotional learning and cultural proficiency, and then you expand to processes and practices, which is culturally responsive instruction, SRG, all of the things, materials and resources, all of the things that we do in the classroom as practical things, and then you move out to systems pieces, which is stakeholder engagement and policies from the board. And so the self-work is the beginning, but it never comes off the table, and social emotional learning was missing. Although we were focusing on cultural proficiency, it's broader than that. And when we start thinking about tying performance and evaluation with adult performance, that has to be included, not only students' outcomes, but also how we connect and how we take care of each other and respond, communicate. And so I'm very excited this is going to be part of the broader scope of the work.
Right.
And the time we're going to invest in coaching, not only large group sessions for PD, but coaching. I'm investing a lot of my time in one-on-one coaching with principals for that reason, because that work is hard to do in large group sessions, because it's very personal.
Yes, okay.
Awesome. I will wrap up with this. I'm going to have kitchen talk. I've talked about this at this table before. And the kitchen is where, and historically, in my tradition, in my background, that's where we have the real conversations as family. And I'm going to say it that way because I know everybody around this table cares a lot about our Black students. I know it's a goal that the board has stated is of utmost importance, top priority. I know that our district leadership team has identified this as a top priority, and I know we have several people in our community who are out here who are a part of this work, and it's the top value and community for a priority for them. That's why they're here. Here's what I know. I know I know our Black students across this country, it's a national crisis in terms of how they're performing. I recognize that. I also recognize that we're leading the work in a lot of ways. When we went to that National Association of School Board conference, people were looking to us because everybody is grappling with how we deal with this. But I think we have to be honest about what this data said. And overall, this data says that we're failing our Black kids. And I can say that because when we talk about the disparity, if we look at how our white students are performing, our white male students in comparison to how our Black male students are doing, that's a systems issue, right? And there are many systems that impact our kids. And I recognize that we get our kids coming from a lot of different spaces, but we are a system that impacts that. So when I hear I'm happy we're having the honest conversation. This isn't about blaming, it's about how do we get to the solution, right? When I hear us talk about all of our staff do not believe that all of our kids, which I take to imply Black kids and Black males, cannot perform at their highest levels. That's a huge problem, right? Which I recognize that you all recognize. And so for me personally, looking at this data, while we had some bright spots around activities and some gains in our third grade literacy levels and some of what our schools for rigor are doing, the overall picture that was painted by the data in this report is in terms of attendance, in terms of discipline, in terms of how our kids are doing academically at the college and career ready benchmark. I think if we're being honest, we are not compliant. We are not serving, our kids are not where they need to be. I can't approve this report, even partially compliant. I think the trend in the data is that we're not where we need to be. But here's what I also know. I also know that we have very committed individuals in this space who are doing a lot of, who are trying a lot of things to try to figure out what our solutions are going to be. My thought would be, I think we get all this data. We know our kids aren't doing well. I think, and this is just me, I can't speak to what my board colleagues are most interested in hearing. And I know as a board, we have set some very strategic goals around Black male achievement, reading, and math. So I know that will help to shape some of the solutions that are brought forth in the future. But I think we need to be very intentional about what are we doing? We've set some very dramatic goals. What are we going to do to make sure that this needle is moved for our kids in these particular areas? I remember looking at our equity plan a couple of years ago. It's been a while since that's resurfaced, and that was at the beginning, and there were some gaps in that plan. But what I was so excited about is that we were starting to see, here is our plan specifically to impact this particular thing. Here's our plan. This is what we want to see, and this is what we're going to do to impact this thing. When I look at a lot of our solutions, it sounds like really great stuff, but none of it connects for me in terms of, though I can make a connection, what is all of our staff dealing with the IDI? How is that going to impact our Black male attendance data, right? What is all of the initiatives that we're doing? We've listed a lot in that monitoring report. I don't have it pulled up in front of me. How do those connect to the outcomes that we want to see for our kids? I think that needs to be drawn a lot more definitively. And that needs to be our focus as a board moving forward. We know the picture about where we're at. What are we going to do to change that? What and how do we specifically monitor that? And it's really exciting to hear that we're looking to include voice from the community. I think that's going to be a huge critical piece. We have a lot of conversations internally, but our community cares just as much about our Black kids as anybody else. Where's that picture? I know that's work that you value, Jamara, and you're on it, and Matt as well. And Jason, I know you do tons of things in terms of community and connecting them with our Black kids. So that's a critical piece, I think, in monitoring moving forward when we're thinking about solutions.
Yes.
How's that voice incorporated, and what are we specifically going to do about the challenges that we're faced with in relation to these two areas?
Yes.
Less the picture about this is what it is. Does that make sense? Thank you.
It makes sense. And our problem-solving tool is built around voice. So it's a requirement that we gather voice from stakeholders, and they are at the table with us thinking about this solution. So I hear what you're saying, and we are thinking about that very deeply, because we can't get this right without their involvement. We'll miss the boat every single time if we don't have student voice, community voice, and family voice from the get-go.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, I know you had a comment or questions.
I did. Thank you for the report. So I'm going to maybe get a little philosophical here. So my husband used to talk about a project that he was implementing, and it was called Name Each Child. And in order to name each child, you have to know each child. And when I think about that in the context of this report, I think about root causes. So how much do we know about our males of color? Do we know what their backgrounds are? Do we know whether or not they had a preschool experience? I mean, how much do we know about what the makeup of those kids are, what their experiences are, which I think help to inform how we go about tackling the larger issue of how we educate them. A lot of stuff happens in the classroom, a lot of stuff happens outside the classroom. I think about Allison and the work she does with community schools and the place that plays in this work and the work that Jason is doing. So I actually think that if we have a better sense of what the root cause is and what the backgrounds of these kids are to really help inform what our strategies are, it may be academic, but it may be something that's completely different. And I really appreciate, the activities piece of this, but it's even beyond that. And I feel like there's so much about our ability to get this right that's predicated on a lot of things that we have the ability to control, but there's so much that we don't have the ability to control, where we have to rely on community partners, and other folks to really help us figure out what the solutions are. So, I'm going to go back to how do we name each child? How do we create that framework that helps us to understand the root cause and the best way to approach the needs? Because this is not cookie cutter. I mean, there are pieces of it that are, but there are lots of pieces of it that are not. And so I think we have to think much more holistically. I love the community engagement piece, but I think there are a whole lot of other factors that are in play here that we may be able to help, but I think we also have to reach out to our community to really help us figure out what the longer-term strategy is. I love what Rob is doing around the preschool experience, but you know what? The greater opportunity we have to get our males of color into preschool, to create that framework, I'm not going to say that that's going to make all the difference, but boy, it's going to give them a huge start. So I think that there are a lot of things in play here that we need to think about along a very long and broad continuum that's not just about what's happening when they get into 5th grade or when they get into high school, but rather where we start them and how we support them in ways that I think the district has a role to play, but the community has an even larger role to play. So I want to get back to how we name each child and what that looks like for our district and how we create that community challenge, that call to action that really gets everybody engaged in this work. Because we can't do it around this horseshoe. Our administrators can't do it by themselves. This is almost a crisis situation, y'all. Mm-hmm. And I mean, when you look at these numbers, it's actually, it's not only embarrassing and frustrating, but it's like, I'm sitting here thinking, not on my watch. And I think that really needs to be our call to action.
So if I can... And I think that's a little bit of my social emotional learning and trauma responsive practice and environment question, and where that kind of goes to. Naming each child doesn't necessarily mean, I think, knowing the absolute details of their past or what their trauma is, but to understand that any child and actually any child at any tier, it's a universal response, I think, is trauma-informed practices and being able to accept that child and know how to respond so that we're not re-traumatizing them. And I think I'm assuming that that's some of the work that you were just talking about. But I would agree that that's, and we do have partners in that work, and I think that is incredibly important. And I think, at least in my mind, that is some of what that social emotional learning limitation that we put also on our consent agenda and approved tonight, and talking about that professional development. I am really hopeful for that as well, to help us get to those critical needs. Kirsten.
I just wanted to circle us back, and I know that this is going to be a conversation that we'll have as a board and with the staff, but one thing that Matt had brought up was that this, when you first started, was that this report is meant to build on some of the others, and that this could potentially be based on goals 2 and 3 the last time that we have this standalone report, because these are going to be so built in to the fabric of our overall board goals. So I just wanted to, for the community, just remind that goals 2 and 3 are the percent of Black male 3rd grade students on track and reading will increase from 35% to 72% by June 2023 as measured by FAST, and we know that that's a huge goal to be met by our district, but I think that call to action by our community, that we're supported by our community and figuring out creative ways to support preschool or literacy or whatever that is will tie into that. And then that goal 3 is the percent of Black male students completing Algebra 1 with a B or higher at the end of grade 9 will increase from 17% to 35% by August 2023. So those are our goals, and that's where we're going. And this is what I think those 2 goals are the meat of what we've been focusing on, at least for me, when we think about disparities around these reports, but that this is going to make it absolutely clear for the community, this is what our goal is, this is our priority, and we should hopefully be able to, at any monitoring report or any given time, moment of time, be able to measure that.
And additionally, we did add to our treatment of students a limitation policy as well. So I think that also will give us some more data points. One of those things, just to remind the board and the public, was that we did add into that operate without a district-wide equity plan that establishes long-term goals with interim goal progress measures as a system of internal progress monitoring. So we did address, and we had, let's not forget, our school resource officer, professional development, and some of those other things that address equity. So we are, as a board, and governance team, putting into place some of those things. So I think we can expect to see some different information as well from that. Ms. Langford.
Sorry, I just have a follow-up question about that, because I know we had discussed that possibility, but I didn't know it was set in stone. And I remember, if I'm correct, the issue was we didn't have a policy specifically around males of color, correct? Was that the issue? I remember us having that conversation.
And that's why I said we
about
may, and
maybe,
we still have to keep talking about
but
that. It
I
might
was
be-
under the impression that we wouldn't necessarily be monitoring in this way, but we would still receive a report like we do with many of our other consent agenda item reports. Did I misunderstand that?
I guess that's why we need to have a conversation. For me, I think the males of color could be a monitoring report around our equity policy, which is actually a written policy now, so that it would morph into, it's going to be part of goals 2 and 3 monitoring, but it also be part of equity monitoring. So we're going to, while we still receive the report, I think we're actually going to get more and better data specific to our goals, because it's not just going to be these 2 times a year where we're going to talk about this, but we're going to talk about it at least 6 times a year, right? That's a thing that we have to work out as a board of what that looks like. But I just think like this report isn't specifically tied to a goal where we're measuring like a set goal post. We're just measuring against ourselves. And I think that goals 2 and 3 and then measuring and monitoring against our equity policy will give us a much better idea and allow us to talk about this in the community in a real way that we can all agree on where we are. Whether we like where we are or not, but that we can see if we're making progress towards that, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. I look forward to those discussions.
I do.
Ms. Bradley, please.
I'll respond to this a little bit differently than the data, because I'm not happy with what I see either. I think I've seen this for a long time, even as being a teacher in the classroom. But I'll just put the bright spot in. Even though that we're in a place where we are in crisis, we can move up from this crisis. But it is going to take the help of everyone. I do not believe that we can do this on our own. If we think that we can do this on our own, we are fooling ourselves. But we need our community, and so I am happy to look out into the crowd and see people who I know that this matters to them and that you are willing to partner with us to make a difference. I see some organizations out there that believe in our students, and I know that we can do this. So while I'm not happy with where we're at, I am hopeful in where we're going to be. So I encourage you to continue to speak up and to have conversations with our superintendent, with our associate superintendent, and us here on the board, so that we can get this right. Because in the next 5 years, I don't want us to continue to have this conversation, and I don't believe that we will, because now that we're in crisis, it has our attention. So I am just encouraging you all that are in the crowd that while this seems doom and gloom, and we keep saying this is bad, but we move up from here, and that's what I solely believe. So I'm looking forward to working with those in the community so that we can make this better, and that in years to come, we won't continue to have this conversation.
Ms. Anderson, thank you.
I agree with you. The one thing that I haven't heard tonight, is I do believe that everyone needs to be at the table, but we haven't. I think teachers need to be at the table too. They need to have they need a voice, and I get that not every classroom is perfect and we need improvement. But if they don't feel like they have a voice, what kind of environment is that? I mean, if you feel like you have no control, you can't be honest, I need help with this, this didn't go well, I don't know what kind of environment we're creating. And when we kind of allude to the percentages, I mean, it falls on me, right? It falls on the teacher. I get that. I mean,
We have that equity. One of our 7 equity teams is a professional learning team, Heather, and that team is made up by teachers, associate principals, and principals. And although it's not like an extensive representation, they have worked with me for 2 years and a half now, and they have become Matt's advisory team. And so they're helping us with some really high-level decision-making. And there are 6 teachers in that team. They are not representing our whole teacher population, I understand that. But it's an effort to involve more building level perspective into the central office decision making, because everybody in that team is working at a building. And there are 25 people that have worked with us very closely. Now our advisory team for Black teachers also is an effort that Mr. Franklin is leading to gather more perspective and how we're doing for Black educators in the system, because we know we have room to grow there too. And we know we won't be good at serving Black kids until we can serve them, and so that they can help us serve the students better. And so it's a cycle, and we understand that. We have to expand that, I agree with you. But we have those 2 inputs right now in place.
Yeah, I would love to see that rotated, so more
Yes.
teachers have a voice, so it's not just this main 6 teachers, I guess.
Yes, I agree.
Which is not.
We rotate them every year, but I agree, we have more. I have to have more people involved.
Mr. Barron?
Yeah, I will try and limit my words here relative to time that we have and the work that we have ahead of us. There's kind of 2 things that comes down to me, but one is I think it's Tom's recognition that everybody needs to be in belief that this is doable. I think to a certain degree, and I tie it to something that you had said, Matt, about being able to show that we can close gaps and then sustain that over time. I think we need to show that we can do this in one of our schools and do that to generate belief. And I know that's easier said than done, and that's going to take years to prove that. But 6 years in on this board, I feel like I'm starting to get a good handle on public education, and there's a lot of people that live their work, and they live what's in front of them and what they recognize, and if something's being held out that they don't think is achievable in front of them, and they don't see any evidence that it's been done elsewhere, then they may not necessarily buy in. It doesn't mean that they're bad people or they don't necessarily belong in that space, but we have to be able to show them that we can do this. I don't think that there's any lack of belief, and I actually there's a heartening aspect to this conversation, as dire as the situation is that the tenor of this conversation between the board and the leadership is different than it's been in the last couple of years, when we have faced this report and really struggled with what was reported in the district's assessment of their work. I think this is the kind of the idea of what we have as a board superintendent team, and I feel like this is more of a team talking right now, and part of that team is challenging you all, and I'm sitting here struggling with whether we are compliant with this policy. We are not closing gaps in performance between our males of color and our other students. I mean, we've done it in some respects, but not with the majority. It's challenging to suggest that our males of color are at least our African American males are demonstrating proficiency in literacy or math per the data that we're looking at. And that doesn't mean that good work's not being done, or that I don't think that we don't have faith in you. And I don't hear anything to that regard. I think we have faith in your belief, and I think we have trust in the work that you've put in, and the ambition, especially the ambition that you all have to do this work and to do it right. but that's the rub here for me is whether we're whether in this academic year if we have met the expectation.
Any other questions, comments, board?
So remind me, Cindy, and maybe we haven't progressed to this point, but typically we get the Males of Color monitoring report in two parts. So as we move to our new goals, and we have the progress measures, what will be the new frequency of reporting and information? Because I know that in the past we have had opportunities to get interim reports and updates as we deemed appropriate based on information and data that's been presented in monitoring reports. So we can ask for an interim update. We can ask for a variety of things. What I don't want to do is to confuse our new normal with the progress measures and how that information will be reported with requesting a higher level of frequency around this particular report. So can you help clarify that before I go someplace that maybe I shouldn't?
You remember what, we just approved a report schedule on our consent agenda.
Quarterly
So quarterly is our,
for each of the three.
for each
For
of the
each of the three?
yeah,
Okay, all right.
thank you. I was trying to find it.
I'm looking
Evan?
at it right now, though.
Yeah, which meeting was that? Did we do that? Was that last?
Oh, I can't. I just looked it up in the library, but
Oh, gotcha.
we get three reports on each of the 4 goals. Is
Okay.
what's in next year's calendar. First report's December, January timeline, and then again like a year from now in our second June meeting, we'd get
Right.
the third report on all 4
Okay.
of those goals.
Okay.
Yeah, black male algebra, the social emotional learning, black male 3rd grade reading, and 3rd grade reading overall.
I thought we had a quarterly. Let me find that.
Okay.
Did I say that wrong?
No, I was just trying to wrap my brain around when you said 4 goals, because we just approved 3 goals, so I was trying to figure out what the fourth one was.
SEL, or
Yeah.
one
My
So-
bad.
limitation.
Yeah,
It's
three-
okay.
three-
It was just me trying to track what you were saying, Rob.
So I'm not going to ask for what I was going to ask for. I'm just going to allow the process to run its course. But I do think that at some point, depending upon where we are as the year progresses, that I may have another request.
Okay.
So I'll just leave it as is for now.
Yeah.
But I do think that enough said.
Okay. Ms. Langford?
Just about us moving into this
Actually,
new.
but, sorry, I just want to correct something. I realized that what you passed the calendar had an error on my part, and the 4th report says 3, even though it's supposed to say 4. So there are 4 reports in there. I apologize.
Okay. So
That was a typo
we'll get
that
a
somehow I overlooked.
edited version then.
Cool.
Okay.
Just a final thought about as the board transitions to our new goals and monitoring, I just want to lift it up that I think while we need to be very focused in our role, and I'm very excited about the work that we've done to solidify our goals and the monitoring that we're going to be doing around them, I do think if we're serious about incorporating community voice, while we have a role, so does our community, right? And we have a lot of different organizations and people who are doing work around Black and brown students in our district. Some of the data that's in that Males of Color monitoring report is still really good information to know. And while it may not be our priority of focus, there are other groups in terms of discipline, attendance, those sorts of things, who might actually really value that information and can use it to inform the work that they're doing if this is really a joint effort. So I just would advocate, and I know we'll have further conversations about this as a board about what this looks like, that we include that as we have information-only items, we do things on consent agendas. I know that organizations can request information from the district, but I think that's just a really unique platform we have to give a very bird's eye view about how our Black students are doing, how our brown students are doing. That might be useful to the community as well, outside of our scope of focus.
Sure, and yeah, and I think those are definitely points to consider as we have that conversation and understand where we want our focus and our staff's focus to be. I just had maybe two more things. You mentioned not being able to share Flex Academy data. I understand that time is limited, but hopefully that's something that can be shared with the board outside of this. I'm aware of the progress that they've made from our community partners meeting recently and various things like that. I think the board would, that would be something to share with the board outside of this. And then just another, if the board would indulge a request for information around the expulsion, the deferred expulsion data. I guess that's something that I wouldn't mind seeing in a memo at some point, data on expulsion recommendations, the reasons, demographics, and those types of things. I know that we've been working that deferred expulsion plan, but I think just understanding still how that's working, how that process is working, what's happening with those students, what their expulsion reason recommendation was for, those types of things would be helpful. If the board, I think I see consensus on that. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. We do have a motion by Barron and a second by Caldwell-Johnson. And this is to accept the report as partially compliant. So I will ask the board to vote. Motion is, the vote is denied with 2 yes, 5 no. Thank you.
We shouldn't be applauding that. Applauding that.
I didn't think it was.
There's nothing good there.
Okay. Sorry, I needed to mark that for Sharon.
Huh?
Let me get back on. I guess I'm going to take a point of privilege here for a moment. I understand that there was some applause among the group here. As we have these monitoring reports and are receiving this data, I think it was very clear that none of us, including staff, were happy with the report. When we talk about compliance and partial compliance and all of the data points that we have, there's a lot of information there. The fact that we denied that the report was ultimately denied isn't necessarily a win for anybody. So I think we heard a lot of team talk up here, and we need to be supportive and continue to be supportive of the efforts. And at times, those efforts are going to fail. And the fact that there is a board up here working to make a difference and put policies in place to help improve those outcomes and to become really student-focused, student outcome focused, and that there is a team of staff who are really working with those goals and trying to put together goal progress measures and trying to put the work in to make things happen for our students. I think that's what needs to be applauded. So I hope everyone will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is item F6, Monitoring Report Preschool Part 2. May I have a motion and a second to accept this report as compliant with Student Expectations Policy 4.11E? You have a second? Thank you. And we have a presentation, and I will have Dr. Ahart introduce and report our presenters.
This is the third Part 2 report tonight, which is our preschool report. And I welcome back to the table Susie Tallman, our Executive Director of Elementary Programs, and our Director of Preschool Programming, Susie Guest.
Yes, so we're here tonight for part 2 of the Early Childhood Board Report. Now that we have our end of the year data, we're going to share our progress toward meeting our goals this year. So just a reminder, our key performance indicators, we're looking at, student readiness in regard to literacy, math, and social emotional development, as well as how parents are engaged at the preschool level. Gold is our assessment that we give 3 times throughout the year, in the fall, winter, and spring. We have 3 checkpoints, and we will share with you our progress from fall to winter and from winter to spring. So as you can see, from fall to winter and winter to spring, we made some gains as far as progress in each of those areas. And the data is pretty consistent. We usually see larger gains when we're going from fall to winter than we do from spring, or from winter to spring. So we've typically seen that from year to year. For our social emotional goal, we actually we made a 53% gain from the beginning of the year to the end, and we ended at 87, meeting the needs of 87% of students. For literacy, we increased by 71%, and in the end, we met the needs of 85% of our students. And for math, I'm going to back up for just a minute. So that was a 2% increase from last year in regard to our literacy goal. I think last year we were at 83%, this year 85%. And then for math, we increased by 67% from the beginning of the year to the end, and we actually ended up at meeting 74% of the needs of students, which we have had math as a focus at the preschool level and gradually making some progress with that. Saw a slight increase from last year from 73% to 74%. One of the other things that we've done in regard to the preschool data is just take a look at the students that 15 to 20% that we didn't meet their needs, whether it was social, emotional, literacy, or math, and looked at exactly, who are those students. And out of that, 80% of them are students that are already identified as having academic needs or behavior needs and receive services through our special education program. And so the remaining 20%, which is interesting, is really across all subgroups. There isn't one, or all student groups, there isn't one that comes to the top out of that. You just kind of see across the board that, in each student group, that there's a small percentage of students that we need to be looking at. So the good news out of that is we're able to really zero in on specific students and be more intentional with our plan from summer and transitioning into kindergarten, just like we do for our students that are receiving special education services.
And then just one more thing to piggyback off that. In your monitoring report, we didn't include it in the PowerPoint because it's already in your monitoring report, but you'll note it has gold data on literacy, math, and social emotional development, and there's no gaps in the development between subgroups. They're all quite even. And so that is in your monitoring report, so I just wanted to make note of that. In April, when we were here, when Susie and I were here last, one of you asked about behavior incident reports, because I had reported on those the year before. So just kind of wanted to include that in the presentation tonight. So what is a behavior incident report? Well, for the first 30 days of school, we teach all of the children what our classroom expectations are. And after that time, if there is a behavior that is disrupting instruction, even instruction for that child, but particularly for the whole other group, the other 19 kids, then we will complete what's called a BIR, or a behavior incident report. And again, that's when it's interfering. We take a look at that data monthly to determine trends and to develop plans. Now, some of those behaviors might include unsafe behaviors like throwing chairs, climbing shelves, running out of the room, yelling, cussing. So those are the types of things we write those on. So in taking a look at the data, okay, well, I did the last ones, but
I thought I had the magic touch.
oh, there.
There we go.
Okay. So if we look at this graph right here for the behavior incident reports, this is our core report. So what this is indicating is that in preschool, we have a very strong core, and that overall our expectations are being taught, because you can see that 89.42% of the students, and we're looking at the light blue because that's this year, 89.42% of the students only had 0 to 1 referrals. Okay, so that's all about teaching our core, teaching our expectations. Number of referrals, students that had 2 to 5, it's 4.87%. And students with 6 or more referrals was at 6%. So again, the majority of our kids know what our expectations are. So I want to take a look at our BIR data by race and ethnicity. Now, if you look, let's focus on the light blue again. 48% of our BIRs were written for African American students, but only 20% of our population was African American. So that's quite a disproportionality there. Asian, 4% of our BIRs were written for Asian students, with them being 13% of the population. Hispanic was 10% of the BIRs written, with 21.5% of the population. Multiracial was 7% of the BIRs written, with them being 5% of the population. White is 31% written, and white is 38% of the population. And then males of color, 46% of our BIRs were written for males of color, and they're only 17% of our population. Okay, that in itself looks pretty discouraging. But what I want to do is I want you to take a look at the next slide. Because once a student receives a BIR, it's not like you can take it away. It's there to stay. But what the data shows is that the number of BIRs reduced every month. So in October, for our African American males by month, 12.67% of those BIRs were written for African American males. But based on that and analyzing the data, creating those relationships with the children, creating the relationships with the families, putting plans in place to meet their needs, if you'll notice, each month that goes down because we're meeting their needs. And by May, only 1.77% of BIRs were written for African American students. But I think that's the power of the relationship, and that's the power of putting those supports in place that the children need. So this, to me, is showing we're doing what we need to be doing. We're looking at those children individually and knowing them by name and figuring out that plan for them, which is reflected in our month-to-month data. So overall, what does our data tell us? We have very strong universal core instruction in both academics and behavior. Literacy, 85% of our students were kindergarten ready. Math, 74% were kindergarten ready. Social emotional, 87%, and that's all gold data, those first three. And then our BIRs, 89% of them receive 0 to 1 BIRs, or behavior incident reports. Now, and as Susie said a little bit earlier, so what about in literacy, that 15% that's not meeting there? 67% of those students were actually early childhood special ed. And so the kids that weren't meeting, the majority of them, 70%, 80% of those kids are already identified as in need of support and services and have that through their IEPs. Next steps. Well, we're going to continue analyzing our data just as we are right now. Our literacy, our gold data in literacy, math, and social and emotional. We're going to continue to look at the FastBridge literacy and FastBridge math, which I included that in the monitoring report as well, which shows how our preschoolers do compared to those that don't have preschool. We're going to continue to look at our data site by site and by classrooms and by subgroups. For example, this last fall, each teacher received their FAST and MAP data. For the kids that were in their preschoolers, we gave them the data on how these kids do. How did your kiddos do? We're going to continue with that, then with a focus on coaching. Also in our next steps, we're gonna, I think it was Matt that mentioned, the most powerful part of PD is monitoring for that implementation. And last time in April, I provided you with our sweeps data, where we actually went in and did observations after our PD. And that PD was focusing on those strategies, those best practice strategies that Matt was talking about earlier too. And we're gonna continue doing that. Our data indicates that we really need to focus on previewing new content and helping students process content. And even though early childhood department is not a school for rigor, we still implement all of these best practice strategies. And when Matt was talking about teaming, it just came to mind because we're starting this early in preschool. Let me give you an example. We did a sweep in one of our preschool classrooms, and the teacher had intentionally paired the kids up, and they were each given the pair a nonfiction book on an animal. The kids had to go together and figure out, based on the pictures, basically, what was that animal's habitat as a team, and solve that problem, then present it to the group. So we're even doing that as young as 4 years old. And it's a very, very powerful strategy that they're doing in elementary, and that we're trying to do the same things in preschool. Another one, just briefly, because it was so darn cute, is they gave kids plastic cups, just like yours, and it was like, who can build the highest tower? Well, you put kids in groups of 2. It was phenomenal listening to them talk. And there was one group that actually made a base for it. And it was all through coaching of the teacher, but they figured it out how to get their tower as high as they could. So, we're also pretty involved in the PLC process, and that's through Solution Tree. We've sent probably 30 teachers through Solution Tree training already. We have another 10 going next week. We brought in a Solution Tree trainer in January, and we're sending another group of probably 15 in the fall. Solution Tree is where we really look at that PLC process and take a look. So what we've done with that is that we've identified 8 essential objectives, and there are gold objectives, and we've unpacked those. So what does it look like to teach? And then we've created formative assessments so that we're all teaching and assessing the same so that our information is valid. We're doing that for 8 of those essentials. It'll take some time. It's a work in progress, but we think it's very important to look at student data skill by skill and student by student, and that's the intent there. And then the last area, last time we were here, you asked about the plan for equity training and cultural proficiency. And I indicated that as a leadership team, we do attend leadership training with the district. But the teachers were feeling kind of stuck because we've passed all the information we can, and we were feeling a little stuck. So what our plan is, Dr. Spikes, who is from the University of North Carolina, he was formerly at Iowa State, Dr. Swalwell from University or from ISU, they're going to be helping us facilitate PD with our staff, focusing on department-wide PD, really focusing on implicit bias and anti-racist education at the early childhood level. And we're going to have Zoom meetings and mentorship with these two, and it's all going to be based on the Courageous Conversations About Race book by Glenn Singleton. So I wanted to report back to you with that, what our plan was for that.
Any questions?
I just have a comment. I like the way that you broke down the data, and although it wasn't the best, you can really see that it did get better. And I saw like a little spike in March, and I feel like
Spring break?
I know, spring break. I'm surprised that May didn't go up a teeny bit, just because that routine is so important, and building those relationships. And I can tell from this data that it's happening. So it's great.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Yeah, just a real quick question, and thank you. Good information, and I really do also appreciate the behavioral information. I think that informs so much of what we talked about just a bit ago. But I don't know that we've ever specifically asked for this information, but do we have the demographic breakdown for our preschool students relative to race?
Yes, you asked for that
Did I
after the
ask-
last board meeting,
Okay,
so
did you
I
send
sent
that?
it on to
Okay.
Dr. Ahart.
I do sort of vaguely remember getting that now. However, I do think that the other thing that to me is really important in this context really goes to our recruitment strategies for UPK. And I realize that demand always exceeds supply. But how are we identifying and recruiting, especially in those childcare deserts where we know a lot of our students of color live that don't necessarily have access? Are we doing any targeted sort of recruitment, outreach, et cetera, to hopefully get some of those kids into preschool?
Yes. In fact, we are adding 2 more partners next fall, which will be an additional 40 students in our community. And then Janet Riggle, who is our enrollment specialist, she actually goes out to like Deer Ridge, the area by Vets Hospital, those apartment complexes, and works also works with VNS. It's no longer called VNS. Every step. Right, because they have case managers that go into the homes, and so we try to get them signed up. The case managers all have our applications.
Okay.
So, additionally, Alma Haynes is our Hispanic interpreter, and she is advertising and doing interviews on both of the Hispanic radio stations.
And then we communicate through the elementary schools as well.
Right. Thank you.
Ms. Langford?
Thank you so much. I would really appreciate that when you all have reports, you always get the information that we asked to us from our last board meeting. I've noticed that consistently over the 4 years that I've got to sit here. So thank you for following up on that information that we had asked for. Just one question in regards to the data around race. I mean, obviously that was very alarming. It's very exciting to hear that your professional development plan is in place, because that's one piece of that for sure, right? When we see a disparity that large, we know there's something there has to be something structural going on. But I will say in my new role professionally, I get a chance to be in classrooms a lot more. And so I also know that our students are coming in need of a lot of emotional support and haven't learned how to self-regulate, and all of those things really do impact how students are learning. And so I'm wondering on the preschool level what it looks like in terms of what does your support for mental health look like in terms of behavior interventions? Is that a need?
It's
or
always
mental
a
health?
need.
Sure. What does it look like right now?
However, well, we're pretty fortunate because every one of our early childhood centers has a family support services team.
Okay.
And that's comprised of nurses, an MSW, Masters of Social Work, and then a family engagement specialist.
Yes.
And so we are all PBIS schools. So we do the first 30 days, it's teaching what our expectations are. But for a lot of kids, that doesn't go far enough. And so you talk about trauma-informed
Yes.
instruction and building those relationships. Our social workers are all trained in trauma-informed care. And so what they do is actually they do consults at the parent level, at the classroom level, and at the child level, creating plans. And that's where I see we put those plans in place. We meet with the parents, we put those plans in place, take a look at what is the root cause here,
Yep.
and put those plans in place and monitor those plans and take data, and that's where you saw those going down, the number of referrals going down. All of our social workers are funded through United Way, partially funded. They're also funded through ECI dollars.
Okay.
So none of our funding for our support services for our kids does not come out of the instructional funding. We have to kind of braid funds and come up with other dollars in order to provide those services to all of our kids.
Yep.
And that's one side of it, and then, of course, the other side of it is adults, and, how do you continue to grow their capacity and support them so that they're better serving, children? And so I think one of the key things that Susie and her team has done most recently is when she talks about looking at the data classroom by classroom, sometimes that tells a story as well, right? And so you can be far more intentional in the coaching and the support that you're providing, not just to students, but to staff as well, because sometimes that shows some gaps as well.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm really excited and interested to see once you all start doing that work with Dr. Spike, if we see a decrease in some of those things sooner in the school year. So in addition to the relationship building that's happening, so thank you.
Any other questions, board?
Yes. So a couple quick things. The family engagement team is, Susie mentioned this, but I want to raise this up. So one of the boards that this board has a seat on is the Polk County Early Childhood Iowa Board. They provide over $200,000 in funding annually to support our family engagement teams, and do that year over year. And so I want to give credit where credit is due there. And their funding allows us to make sure that if a child is in one of our preschool centers, no matter what funding stream is paying for them to be there, that they receive the same level of service. And that's because certain dollars don't allow for supporting those positions. But Susie very wisely and honorably wants to make sure that there's no difference in the level or type of service that our 4-year-olds get when they're in our preschools. Second point, since your last time before us, you sent us data, reams of data that I loved because this is the stuff that really engages me. So there was a lot of interest in why students don't enroll in preschool and where they come from. And one of the things that struck me when I looked at it, and I just was thinking about it in the last presentation, and I haven't raised it up to anybody yet, but one of the one of the pieces that they provided to all of us, and this was sent to us, is if you go several sheets down, is looking at kindergarten enrollment data and specifically African American. I think it's all African American students, and whether they attended preschool or not. And the data doesn't show a lot of variation except in a handful of buildings. And what's interesting about those handful of buildings where there's a large disproportionately large percentage of the African American students didn't get preschool is they're all in kind of the same central area. Follow along with me. King, Edmonds, Moulton, Monroe. At least a third of the African American males. In Edmonds, it was actually 81% of African American students. I don't think it was just males, did not have access to preschool when they entered kindergarten. I don't say that with any special purpose, but if we're going to tie lines or draw lines between the different things that we talk about, that's one of them, because that's a very concise geographic area, mainly the urban core, where a lot of African American students are not entering kindergarten with preschool, and we know preschool works. And my in the monitoring report, my old friend, the chart that breaks out FAST data by preschool enrollment or not was right there. And again, 2/3 of kids that had preschool are ready to learn when they start kindergarten. Kids that didn't have preschool, whether it was our preschool, partner preschool, or private preschool, kids that didn't have it, 28.9% of them came in ready to learn. In September of their kindergarten year, when they're 5 years old, there's already a gap. And it's a pretty sizable gap. And it's a gap that we'll spend the next 13 years, not we, you guys, will spend the next 13 years trying to recover. And that's why it's so important to get more of our 4-year-olds into preschool. So the data that you sent us shows that about 3,000 DMPS kindergartners are enrolled every year, 1,500 of whom have had preschool that's our preschool, whether it is DMPS in one of our preschool centers, or it's a partner center like the two that Susie raised up that'll join next year. About 500 families reported that they had preschool with some other private provider that wasn't ours. That leaves about 1,000 5-year-olds that as a 4-year-old did not have access to preschool. We can't serve those kids because the Head Start's capped, Shared Visions is capped, and the Universal Pre-K program only works on prior year enrollment data. So we get the money next year to serve next year's kids based on how many we served last year. So if we're going to expand the number of kids that we serve in preschool, we have to come up with both the space to serve them and the dollars to fund a teacher, an associate, and the supplies for that classroom. A total that's roughly $125,000. And that's why we are out here right now trying to raise that amount so that we can fund a classroom, because we have a room. I was there this morning, and I told all the folks from the Head Start committee, hey, we're not meeting here next year. This is going to be a classroom next year. It's a rare situation when we have a room that we can convert into a preschool classroom. But the challenge is we don't have the revenue. We cut $24 million out of our general fund budget for this next year. If we're going to bring in more 4-year-olds next year, we have to find $125,000, and we are over $50,000 of our way towards that goal. A couple more contributions just came in today, and I'm not going to stop talking about this for the next 2 months. And I know my colleagues are not going to stop talking about it either. And we're going to get there. And then once we get 40 more kids in our preschool next year, then we're going to see what it's going to take to start chipping away at the next 960 of them, because it's the right and honest thing to do. And, in The crazy thing about it is that in very rare circumstances, we have to talk about access to education. For kids 5 years and up to 21, depending on their special education circumstances, they have access to education, guaranteed. If they're 4, they do not. Did their parents sign up early enough? Are they able to transport them to one of our centers? In some cases, are they able to pay for a private provider if they can't get in with us? Mind you, at 4, their brain is still developing. And we know it works. So there couldn't be anything more abhorrent about this problem. But it's fixable. And we're gonna take a step forward this summer, and we're gonna keep going at it because it's the right thing to do. So I did not mean to have a commercial here. So there's really 2 ways to make an effort in this regard. Both of them involve your hard-earned dollars, of course. But we have a page on our website, and the district currently has a column up that I wrote for the Register, featured on the Des Moines Schools webpage, and you can click straight from there to make a contribution. And it will go directly to that classroom and that teacher and that associate that will be teaching there. I swear they will get there in 2 months. Your dollars will go directly to teaching 40 4-year-olds next year. And if you can't, or if you don't want to give your $3,000, that $30,000, whatever it is, or $30, whatever we can give, you can mail a check also to the Des Moines Public Schools, 2323 Grand Avenue, Des Moines 50312. Just note Mitchell Early Learning Center or preschool, and we'll make sure it gets to the right place.
Rob, if I may.
Yeah.
The donation isn't just going to educate 40 students this fall. It literally is making possible that classroom serving 40 students in perpetuity. So it's a gift that keeps on giving after the initial, just to call that out. It's sort of counterintuitive
Yeah,
for people
and
who aren't enmeshed in school finance like we are.
You're exactly right. This telethon won't work if we don't have people setting me up to say things like that. Because that's the best thing about the state program. Oh, the worst thing is it's based on last year's enrollment. The best thing is that if we can get this one time, the state will cover this next year, and that classroom will still have 40 more kids in it, year over year over year over year. And those 40 more kids, those 40 more 4-year-olds will be ready for kindergarten the next year. And the process will turn over and over and over. Yeah.
And then can I add to that, that we will have the ability next year to go from 4 days a week to 5 days a week. So we're increasing our contact time with students. So I don't know, just add that to your.
Nice. Any other comments, board? Thank you, Rob. Okay, we do have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote. Thank you. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
For your
Thank you.
report.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Susie.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is F7 Monitoring Report Algebra 1, Part 2. May I have a motion and a second to accept this report as compliant with student expectation policies 4.1, 1D? So moved. Second. And we have a presentation, which I will also turn over to Dr. Ahart to introduce the report and our presenters.
Okay, so this is the grand finale of the monitoring report. This is part 2, Algebra 1, part 2, and again, it's exciting that a lot of good work has gone into articulating a vision for mathematics and for really back mapping, not viewing this as a 9th grade challenge, but even a pre-K through 9th grade challenge. And so we have a good start on that. So it's really exciting to see what that will be translated into moving into next year with a more specific goal with more defined measures for success. So with that, I will turn it over to our leadership team here and let them get underway. Our target for 10 minutes per report. We're not meeting, but
we'll see if we can make
we'll
the
see
mark.
if we can make it this time.
Sure. My name is Sarah Doherty. I'm the Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning. I'm here with Courtney Wallstrom, our Secondary Math Curriculum Coordinator, and Noelle Tickey, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. And we'll start tonight with an overview of our key performance indicators. And here they are, showing just a basic visual overview of the general direction this data has taken over the course of the year. This is representation of 3-year trend data. We recognize there are some anomalies in the year-to-year data sets, but we're looking at those trends over time in those MAP measures, and then looking at students successfully completing algebra with a C or higher, and we also look at failure rates. So those are our measures around those 3-year trends. First, we'll start with the percent of 8th grade students meeting the fall to spring projected growth trend. And as you've heard already in a number of our reports tonight, that's those students meeting those goals set based on their fall performance. We had some celebrations for our students in our Asian student group and our multiracial student group. And we still have areas of concern around our white student group, our special education student group, and African American student group. There it goes. This is looking at 9th grade MAP data, fall to spring, those students meeting projected growth. That trend data, multiracial students up almost 15%, an area for celebration, and our Hispanic students up almost 8%. So those are some significant movements. Areas of concern continue to be our students in our African American student group, and ELL students showed a slight decrease. This is a percentage of students progressing or on track for that college and career readiness on the math map. And we saw some concerns in 8th grade, especially noting that special education student group making those dips, but we can attribute that to some, I think, improvements we've made in identifying appropriate placements for those students in coursework, and increasing our look at making sure that all kids are receiving on grade level access. And we also saw a great celebration there for our ELL students, 8.63% gains. Still those working on getting to a point where we're closing gaps, but moving toward it. We had some real celebrations for our 9th grade cohort, and that's also reflected in our grades that we saw as a result. So here are our percent of students completing Algebra 1 with a C or higher by the end of 9th grade. We saw some real celebrations for our ELL students, and all student groups indeed increased the incidence of completing Algebra 1 successfully. Our area of concern is our African American student group. While they grew, they had the lowest rate of growth, and so it's an area for us to continue to try to understand and to focus our efforts around. We also wanted to include some important data that wasn't necessarily called out for in the KPIs, but data that we look at. And I think, Rob, got to your point about schools doing it, because that's not always indicated in that trend data, and certainly not in aggregated data sets of all of our schools. And so this is the spread of 8th grade MAP, percent of projected growth data spread. Those top two numbers, that 59.79% and the 61.90%, are two lowest performing schools in terms of students meeting that the amount of projected growth met. And then we have two schools for whom they exceeded that. They were growing students at a rate that closed gaps, 128% and 139%. And so I think you've heard a conversation tonight about supporting schools differently. This is a clear data set that says some schools need more support, and rather than spreading ourselves equally over all of these sites, there are places for us to do work that will make more differences, and there are places who are absolutely getting the job done, and it's time for us to learn from them. And so Courtney's going to talk in a moment more about what that looks like in some more detail. There we go. And here is the ninth grade MAP percent of projected growth data spread. 16% of growth on one end, 125% of growth. That school is indeed closing gaps for students. And so it was just another important data point to provide, to paint a more complete picture than just those aggregated sets, and to help bring some context to our approach.
Several years ago, the K-12 math leadership team was formed out of the recognition that Sarah mentioned, where we recognize that our Algebra 1 issues don't start in ninth grade, and they really go all the way back to pre-K or kindergarten. And so kind of making that vertical through line, I think, is really important. What we've realized over the past year, though, is we jumped straight to the action piece, and we haven't really gone in and done the collaborative problem solving to get at the root cause. Like, what is really causing our woes in Algebra 1? And I think that that's been reiterated in other reports today, that that's really where we need to start launching into next year. I am very excited when I think about the new board goals that you have set forth, specifically around math. I think it helps really provide a lot of clarity, and it'll help that team have a clear focus for what we're going to problem solve around, and then also set actions around. What we already have in place, and we had talked about this just a little bit in our first report, is a redesign of the Algebra 1 curriculum, and also a pilot of 6-8 materials for next year in some classrooms across the district, really focused on the shifts in the core, and you can see those there. When we designed the original, like when the core was released, we focused a lot on the focus bullet there, where we prioritize standards. And what we realized this past year in doing an audit of the curriculum is that we're really missing that balance in the final bullet there, the balance between conceptual, procedural, and application. And I think that's really echoed in our students' feedback, that in Algebra 1, it's just straight procedural, like solving equations, doing rote math. And I think that it provides a lot more opportunity for relevance and for students to engage in their own way when I'm asking them to like defend their strategy, or to critique someone else's reasoning, or to take a data set and apply it. That is going to provide a lot more opportunities for us to engage more students than just our math kids or the kids who we have identified as our math kids. It kind of opens up the field, which I think is really exciting. A side note about this is we've been able to use an open educational resource for this curriculum redesign. And so what that means is we're spending very little on the actual materials, and instead we're able to invest in training teachers, which I think is really, really exciting. With any change, obviously we know that we're going to have to provide some implementation support, and that's where that math leadership team is going to have to determine what that ongoing monitoring will look like so that we can make sure that we're making progress toward that board goal. As Sarah mentioned, when we look at those ranges, it's clear that we have to tier our supports to schools, that it can't just be whatever school calls me, that's where I go and provide math support. Clearly, we need more support in certain spaces than we do in others. And then the last one that I would mention is we have a new partnership with an Iowa State group, a grant that will be starting in August, that is really focused on specifically looking at student-centered, equity-based education and specifically how we can embed culturally inclusive practices in Algebra 1. And that's like, they're passionate about that, and clearly we are, and so I'm really excited to have their help coming alongside us with that. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
I just wanted to raise up that not only are we pretty aggressively, I would say, going after raising the bar for kids with our new goals, but we're also raising the standard for what we're saying is acceptable with that goal.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is tied to, if we can get kids to that level by the end of 9th grade, that opens up so many more possibilities for upper level math. It opens up more possibilities for STEM opportunities within our school and continue to strengthen those, but also career opportunities for our kids. Because I know even when I went and toured the facilities for some of the plumbers and steam fitters, and when they were talking about even what the types of levels of math that their apprentices needed to be successful, so many of them were needing to go take remedial math at DMAC to even be able to do an apprentice level program, which isn't one I think that we traditionally think of as being rigorous math science. We usually think of our really good math science kids, going on to college to become engineers, but they're needed in electrical, in HVAC, in so many of those. And so I think it's just really important, I think, for us to have that conversation around math, because I think sometimes that gets lost, that math is just a skill that you take to get into a program to be an engineer or just to get into college, where oftentimes it's a real world application that our kids need. So to have that real world application to the math component for kids, I think will also open up some career conversations and offer some hope, I think, for some of our kids too.
Yeah, all kids are math kids.
Yeah.
Courtney?
Yes, yes.
Any other comments or questions? And I'm just gonna, since Kirsten brought up the new board goal, I'm gonna shoot these off every chance we get. We need to do that, and I think that's going to be part of the process. Is that these board goals and our progress toward them will be in sight in this boardroom at all times. But that math goal is that the percent of Black male students completing Algebra 1 with a B or higher by the end of grade 9 will increase from 17% to 35% by August 2023. So as Kirsten mentioned, the bar was raised from that C to B, and that was with a lot of staff input as well. I just want to raise that up too, because staff wanted that level raised as much as probably instigated us raising it, really.
And can I add to that the B is so important, because when we think about what an A, B, or C means, it's sometimes arbitrary or about what our next steps are, but a B means those students have mastered a majority of grade level standards, and that is the bar that we want for all students. Yep. So that B represents learning, and we want it to. So thank you for reiterating that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor, so please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is item F8, Immigrant Heritage Month Resolution. And I'm actually going to turn this over to Mr. Barron to give some background on this item.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about this. So June is National Immigrant Heritage Month and has been for the last few years. It was something that was, I think, inaugurated in the Obama administration. And at the end of May, I got an email from an organization I'm part of called New American Leaders. New American Leaders is focused on empowering, developing, and supporting a lot of first and second generation Americans who are running for and serving in elected office all across the country. And I don't fit into either one of those categories, but a lot of my work on the side is focused on empowering and educating Latinos in Iowa to run and serve their local communities. And so I've been engaged with NAL for a few years, and they shared a resolution drafted by another NAL member who's a state legislator in Georgia, marking Immigrant Heritage Month. And it just, made sense to me in a way that certain times resolutions aren't as significant as the real work. In our district, the contributions and impact that immigrants make, both as students in the classroom and as staff, are really significant and set us apart from the other districts in this state, I think, in a very meaningful way and in a way that we should be celebrating. So I talked to Cindy and I talked to Kirsten, and they were both very supportive of drafting our own resolution. And I appreciate Dr. Ahart and his team really taking the lead in making sure that we drafted something that was appropriate and to our population of students and staff and their parents, all of whom I think are contributing to Des Moines, Iowa. The other reason I wanted to push this tonight is because we're not a district that measures ourselves against other districts in Iowa. We're a district that measures ourselves against districts all over the country. And I think as we set ourselves apart from those other districts, we also need to tell our story that Iowa is not what folks on the coast necessarily think it to be. Mm-hmm. And rather, we're a state that, or Des Moines, I should say, is a district where 4,000 of our 33,000 kids were born in another country, and many more were our children of parents who were born in another country. We speak over 100 languages in this district, and we have staff, not as many as I would want, but we have staff that mirror that diversity, and I want us to be known for that, and I don't want to miss a shot at not just raising up the individuals that are recognized by this resolution, but the entity itself, and those of us that are a part of this district should feel good about it, because you all know I got a 6-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter, and they will be graduates of this school district, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm really excited for who Javi and Mira are going to meet and learn from in their classrooms for all their years in this school district. And I'm not talking about their teachers. I'm talking about the kids that they're going to be in there with. So I appreciate your consideration of this resolution, and I look forward to any further discussion or questions.
That we had this listed as a discussion / action item, so which is why I didn't ask for approval first, but I'm ready for a motion if the board is.
So moved. Oh, sorry, Rob.
No, second.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you for bringing this to our attention, and I also echo the thanks to the staff for compiling a fitting resolution for our district as well. Okay, please vote. Okay, the resolution is approved 7-0. Thank you again. Next item on our agenda is a discussion item. It's F9 GP 1.1 policy revision, and this is for governing style and values. This was a revision suggested in the June 4th, 2019 quarterly board self-evaluation discussion. It addresses, you'll see the revision on your board docs. It addresses the idea that our self-monitoring and conduct goes beyond our regular board meetings by removing some language, and then also adds the student outcomes governance framework into our self-evaluation process. And this is something that the next board coaches will be assisting us with, and that we're already involved in. And the framework is also attached to the policy, or to this agenda item. And if you note pages 15 through 17 on that framework document, there are tools to assist in the process of quarterly self-monitoring as well. 15 to 17. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on this policy revision? Any other suggestions? Okay. I guess I'm going to make a plug here too, that as we finish the 40X book study, which we're doing after this tonight, that I would suggest that setting a wildly important goal regarding our achievement score according to this student outcomes focused governance rubric could be very beneficial, and hopefully something that we can discuss more. Because when we're talking about lead measures that drive outcome, the research has already been done for us through this model, and around where behaviors, adult behaviors of our board governance team contribute to effective governance. And the scoreboard is already set for us. That's that page, those pages 15 through 17. It would keep us focused on our role as a governance team and may allow individual board members to make commitments to behaviors and activities that improve those scores, which in the end improves our district performance. And then the board work plan could be aligned with those commitments and goals. And that agenda item, that is our board work plan, which is coming up next, could serve as our WIG session. While not weekly, that might be what we have to settle for as our board meets. So I just want to put that out there for thought for further discussion later. And with no other suggestions, we'll just have this policy revision on the next agenda for action on the consent agenda. So thank you. And I think we're ready to move on then to F10, which is our board work plan, and further details what we have committed to doing to fulfill our governance duties with integrity. And it's a standing agenda item as part of our self-monitoring and accountability process. And I will turn it over to Kirsten.
I don't know why that microphone gets tricky the later the night goes on. So I think where we are at is in terms of updating is, Terry, do you have anything for us on the external monitoring? Do you have what you need back from folks, or?
I don't believe, I didn't look at this before I came in today, and I sent it out before I went on vacation. I will go back and look. I don't know that I got responses from everyone. And I couldn't get it to populate into SurveyMonkey to work the way I needed it to, so I just sent out the document to everybody and just ask you to rank. But I will go in and double check, and individuals that have not received a response from, I'll resend.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
You know, vacation just gets in the way of my board work, sorry.
Yep. And then we'll complete our ongoing professional development on 4DX. And I think in addition to that too, we were invited to participate in some Covey, some Franklin Covey work next week, which I'm planning on being there for at least part of both of the days. I don't know. I know, Terry, you had mentioned that you wouldn't be able to join us for the first day, so it probably didn't make a ton of sense to come for the second.
I'll be there.
Cindy will be there. Is anyone else able to join us at all?
I believe so. I might have one day cut a little short.
Okay. And that's kind of where I'm at too. Yeah. So, and we can discuss that more in work session, but we're wrapping up that cycle of our professional development. KPIs, now that we have our goals approved, I know we'll continue to work with board or with staff on that. Tom, do you have any updates, or is there anything that the board should keep in mind as we continue to look at KPI reviews?
I don't think so.
Okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I just thought if anyone had an update, it was probably you. Community workshop, I think we're working on that in our work session.
Yep.
Is that correct?
I
Okay.
just have something to.
And then the evaluation tool for the superintendent, I had that on June 4th that you had updated the tool reflecting this year's evaluation. And do we have an update for that to the board, Cindy, or?
Yeah, I guess I could send it out to the board, but we had mentioned, I think I mentioned at the last meeting that it was the same tool as we used at this last evaluation, updated with the new information. And it will also then, it hasn't been updated with the new goals, the 3 goals, and the new management limitation, because we just adopted those tonight. So those will be added. If the board would like me to send that out, I can. Otherwise, Tom has received a copy of it, and I don't think had any feedback.
Okay, so I'm just gonna mark that as, that was just the one thing that I wasn't sure if it was
So I guess
done.
if you want to take a look at it, you can let me know individually.
Okay, perfect. And then the only new thing that I believe we had added was, this is something we've been continually talking about, is updating the language within the treatment of employees. And so we probably need to just decide how we would like to do that work and what our timeline might be.
Oh, and that's around what we want to see on the report. So I think,
Yeah. And we just said to set a collaborative work session, so I think we should probably, do we need to do that during agenda planning tomorrow? Does the board have a?
I think that's something we maybe just need to talk about in agenda planning, about
Okay.
what that really
Perfect.
means and what we.
Okay, is there anything else that anyone is thinking we should tackle this summer?
Oh.
I think, yeah, that's the expectation, yeah.
Sorry. Can we get an update on the board position?
Oh.
At some point?
Yeah, the board,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
that's all I have.
Okay. The next on the agenda are items of privilege. And I'm just giving the reminder that our next board meeting is July 9th. That's the only meeting we have in July. And then just a friendly reminder to the board about kind of in relationship to our last agenda item and the comment about our governance duties and doing those with integrity. And I put this in my last memo, but I just want to remind everybody of our policy GP 1.7, director's individual responsibilities and preparation and participation for meetings, and the expectation around questions for agenda items and those being in by 8 a.m. To the superintendent or designee and the board chair no later than 8 a.m. the day before. And then reminding you too that doesn't shouldn't be construed to limit a board member's ability to ask questions during the board meeting. So I just wanted to bring that to our attention again, because it's something that we've committed to, but perhaps the board hasn't fulfilled that commitment with integrity. And I didn't want to wait till the next quarterly evaluation to talk about that. So that's all I have. Do any other board members have comments? Ms. Lang, Ms. Delagardelle?
I will not be here for the July meeting because I will be going on vacation, but what I wanted to highlight for the community was we're going to have between 400 and 500 millennial progressive leaders descending on our city in late July as part of the New Leaders Council National Convention, and I'm heavily involved in that. And so if you are seeing any of these leaders in our community, they're coming from out of state, and oftentimes they want to learn from experts in our community and in Iowa and take ideas back to their community. So if you just would like to be more connected with a young leader, I would be more than happy to make that connection. So, or board members, if any of you would like to as well.
Thank you. Ms. Langford?
Ooh, my heart is pounding and no one is here still, so it's probably time to talk about this. 4 years ago, I was a 22-year-old student, and I was a recent grad, very passionate, and had this crazy idea to run for the school board. And I was so fortunate to have a team of people surround me and help me do that. And District 2 came out and supported me and elected me to the seat, and it has been such a privilege. And so, God, I'm getting emotional. Yeah. So it's with very mixed emotions that I say that I will be resigning from the seat effective after the next election, the first board meeting after our election in November. And I just want to say that it has been my extreme pleasure to work with this phenomenal group of people, our board members who sit here now and who have moved on, are so committed to the students that we serve, and it really has been the highlight of my time. And our superintendent, as much as we go back and forth, I have so much respect for you and all of our staff. And most importantly, our students. I have taken so many lessons away from them, and so proud of the students that I've had the opportunity to connect with and those that I haven't. And so I guess I want to say to the community, thank you so much, particularly for the residents of District 2 for your support. I have committed that the next 6 months, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I have 6 months. I will be working tirelessly with these individuals around the table to fulfill the work that we have set out to do. And yeah, it has been a privilege. I will say, because of time, we can save the I miss yous and you've been so great, just because we have a book study to get to. I know you guys love me and that our work together has been impactful.
Right, we don't need to do that tonight.
We can do that another time. We ain't got to do none of that now.
Why
but
were you assuming those were coming?
Oh,
Right.
you knew.
A little
you love
presumptuous
me.
here.
For the
4 years
public.
ago, I was in my mid-40s.
For the public, they love me. And yeah, so for those of you who are interested in running, we are looking for, the seat is open, and we need really passionate, engaged people who are going to advocate for our kids. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Deanna, and I appreciate your making that announcement in this much in advance, so that people who might consider filling those last 2 years of your term have the opportunity to give some thought to that, and prior to the filing deadline, which comes up later in August. But it does take a lot of time to put those thoughts together to decide to run. So I appreciate you giving people time, and yeah, we will hold you accountable for the next 6 months to everything that, yes, exactly. Anybody else? Okay, I will turn it over to Dr. Ahart for the superintendent's report.
Well, I don't have a whole lot. I guess I just want to share that our buildings right now are, if they're not being renovated or updated or receiving new construction, they are full of kids. I mean, there is so much going on. I was at Hoover today taking a class that was being taught by some of our staff on trauma-informed classrooms, and just the number of students that I had contact with because of all the stuff happening there. And that was just at one of our buildings. It also happens to be receiving a new roof this summer. So I just want to remind our community that while the school year is over and summer has started, and it's way different than it was years ago. This is a busy place throughout the summer where we have dozens of meal sites and summer school programs and athletic programs happening throughout the summer. Preschool, Head Start starts up this week. It's a year-round gig, and I also just want to echo the remarks that many of our board members made this evening, in that it feels often as the school teams that we own every challenge that the community has, and if it involves a student-aged person, it's our problem to solve, and we can't solve everything. We need to do better. We need to own our part, and we also have to double down and actively engage the broader community to make sure that our little ones get everything that they need to reach their potential. And so I want to just recognize that our board understands that, appreciates that, and for the entire community, our children are all of our responsibility. So thank you in advance for taking some extra time and energy and resource to make sure our little ones have what they need.
Thank you. And I will adjourn this meeting, and we'll start the work session in the next 5 minutes or so.